Chapter 381. Half an hour wasn't a long time, but it was enough to make one bored to death while waiting for someone. Since Brando was bored, he decided to practice his elementalist fire spells. He raised his hands and imitated the wandering magician, causing flames to dance between his fingers. His performance quickly attracted a large group of tree elves and Tanian children. They surrounded Brando and stared at Brando's magic without blinking. It was as if this young lord was an artist performing magic. Amandina was worried that Brendel would lose his temper because of this, but not only did he not lose his temper, he even got along well with the children and became the king of the children in a short time. She didn't know why, but when she saw the scene of Brando playing with the children, her heart was slightly moved, as if something had touched her. She opened her mouth wanting to say something but no sound came out. My lord is a good person. The red-haired girl had bought a beautiful silver ring from a Tanian. She used it to tie it into her ponytail, and her fiery red ponytail swayed gently in the breeze, looking very much like her temperament. I never knew that nobles could be so approachable. Yes, Amandina replied. Is he a friend of yours? Suddenly, a thick and deep voice asked. The two ladies turned around in shock and saw a tall elf with a head full of green hair, wearing a leaf headdress and a cloak. His upper body was almost naked, revealing his shiny muscles. He was standing behind them and looking at the young man not far away. A tree elf and a druid at that. Yes, sir. Amandina blushed and subconsciously moved to the side. Are you the guests from Abes? The tree elf asked again. Amandina nodded. I heard that you human nobles look down on us and the Tanians, thinking that we are barbarians. But looking at this lord's actions, it seems that I have misunderstood you humans? He asked. My lord doesn't think so, Amandina replied. In fact, he protects many Tanians. I see. The tree elf looked at Brando and nodded. But Brando didn't pay attention to their conversation. He responded to the requests of the children and showed them all kinds of new tricks. The children cheered from time to time. Even though the green tower was magnificent and beautiful, it was rarely seen outside. The children near and far knew that a wizard had come to perform fireworks, and more people gathered around. It was like a festival. Sifrit stood by Brando's side. Her peers looked at her brother with adoration, and it satisfied her greatly. She would occasionally raise her head to look at Brando with sparkling eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt that there was someone as great as her father in this world. But while Brando was responding to the children's requests, he was also practicing his fire spells. This was because elementalists and planeswalkers used the elemental pool differently. To an elementalist, the elemental pool was more like a channel. The larger the channel, the greater the synergy between the elemental pool, and the more spells they could cast at the same time. In other words, an elementalist didn't actually consume the elemental pool. They only used the elemental pool to reassemble the elemental pool. For example, a flame arrow that took up 10 slots of the elemental pool didn't consume 10 fire elemental pool, but only 10 slots of the elemental pool. Only high-rank spells that surpassed the 10th circle would consume the elemental pool, in order to manipulate the elemental pool in the environment to create large-scale spells. But even these spells didn't consume much elemental pool. Compared to the elemental pool consumed was sometimes less than 1/10 of the elemental pool. Therefore, the elementalist's elemental pool naturally recovered very slowly. Until they became elementalists, they could only recover 1 elemental pool per day. Even after they became elementalists, it was only doubled. In fact, in the later stages of the war, elementalists mostly used elemental crystals to pay for consumption, and then used their own elemental pool as a channel to channel large-scale spells. Especially those great elementalists, it was very common for them to channel 3 or 4 large-scale spells at once with the help of elemental synergy. Planeswalkers, on the other hand, had their own system. They used their own land cards to generate elemental pools and paid for these elemental pools. In fact, it was an independent and complete cycle, almost without any direct connection with the world. Brando sometimes couldn't help but think that perhaps it was because of this that planeswalkers could create their own world. While practicing his spells, Brendel looked at his own fire elemental pool. The fire elemental pool was only 38 slots, and there was still a long way to go before he could unlock the fire djinn. This made him a little depressed. But when Brando saw the fire elemental pool on his hand forming a ring shape, it was as if a bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. Something occurred to him. The young man hurriedly rummaged through his pocket and found a necklace at the bottom. Star of Flame Magic. Fire elemental pool expands by half. Fire elemental pool strengthens by 10. This was the reward he got when he killed Ekman. Because he didn't have any fire elemental cards at that time, he kept it at the bottom of his chest for who knows how long. He even forgot about it for a while. If it wasn't for the fact that he was bored and practicing his spells here, he wouldn't have thought about it at all. But with this thing, Brando immediately took off the ghoul necklace and equipped the Star of Flame. Then he opened his elemental pool to take a look. The 38 slots of the elemental pool immediately became 57 slots, which greatly exceeded the fire djinn's requirement. He suppressed the excitement in his heart. Although he couldn't help but want to laugh 3 times, he immediately opened the card book to unlock the fire djinn. Fire djinn, Scorching Hell X. 15 fire creature. Elemental djinn, level 36 creature. Tap the fire djinn to deal heavy damage to your opponent and shuffle it back into your deck. When the fire djinn is on the battlefield, pay 2 fire per day. On the scorching earth, the fire djinn always strikes fear into the hearts of its enemies. But before Brando could appreciate the new card, he suddenly heard someone calling him. The young man raised his head and looked over the heads of the children. He saw a familiar figure standing in the crowd not far away. It was the old swordsman, Coden. The old man was waving at him. Brendel was not surprised when he saw Coden. When Veronica and the others left, he asked the Fireclaw Lizardman Lord Ropar to find this old swordsman and ask him to investigate why the Kurlutz people were here. Compared to the Fireclaw Lizardman, Coden, as a human, was obviously more inconspicuous. But he did not expect the progress to be so fast. Brendel thought that the old man was quite capable. It had only been an hour or 2 since they left the Centaur's Hoof Market. He immediately stopped his spell, calmed the children, and told them that he had something important to do. It had to be said that he already had a great reputation among the children of the Tanians and Tree Elves. Although they were reluctant to part with him, they still parted to let him go to Coden. "How is it?" Brando asked as soon as he got close. Coden sat down on a tree by the side of the road. Even though the entire street was made of wood, he raised his head and looked at Brendel. "Guess what happened, boy?" "How am I supposed to guess?" Brando said in annoyance. "Anyway, it can't be for the same reason as us. Judging from the time, they left much earlier than us. So unless the druids informed them beforehand, they wouldn't be here for this reason. Besides, the Cruz Empire wouldn't care about the Loop of Trade Winds unless there's a divine artifact hidden here." But when the divine artifact was mentioned, Brando suddenly had a thought. He couldn't help but wonder if there was news about Valhalla being leaked. "Forget it, just say it." Brando frowned. "Divine artifact?" Coden was surprised. "You're pretty close to the mark. They're here for the Lionheart." The Lionheart? Brando almost choked on his own saliva. What was going on? Why would the Lionheart be here? "Yes. You know about the strange phenomenon that happened in Chablis half a year ago, right?" Brando's expression became strange. Not only did he know about it, but he also knew that the strange phenomenon was caused by him. He suppressed his doubts and asked, "But didn't that happen in Chablis? It's said that the divine artifact is related to the Lionheart. But it's strange, isn't the Lionheart in the hands of the royal family?" Coden frowned. "No matter what, those people came all the way here. I heard that they entered the Black Forest from the south of Chablis, but it seems like they didn't find anything." Brando immediately understood. Those people must have gathered here after hearing about the strange phenomenon in the Loop of Trade Winds. But could this be counted as a lucky hit? He suddenly felt troubled. He knew the complicated relationship between the Flaming Edge, the Lionheart, and the Cruz Empire. The fact that they sent a duke to take charge of this matter was enough to show the importance of the empire. But the problem was that the Loop of Trade Winds had nothing to do with this matter. The only thing inside was Valhalla. But these people wouldn't believe it. They would definitely go and check it out like him. This was troublesome. Brando suddenly felt a little troubled. Cruz Empire shouldn't be the only ones here, right? He suddenly asked. Since the divine artifact's reaction caused such a huge commotion, Cruz Empire shouldn't be the only ones here. Coden looked at him with admiration and nodded. You guessed right. It's not just Crew's empire, Erwin Empire is here too. They came under the orders of the royal faction, but Erwin Empire wasn't divided yet when they entered the Black Forest. I don't think they know what's going on outside. It's fine if they don't know. Brando shook his head. There's more. Buga's wizards, the Holy Cathedral of Fire, and some other random forces. Coden replied. But the Druids only allowed Erwin Empire, Crew's empire, and the Holy Cathedral of Fire to enter the city. Buga's wizards entered the Green Tower as individual units. How did you find out so much? As long as there are bars and adventurers, this information can't be hidden. Brando nodded. This is a huge commotion. I wonder what's going to happen next. But he did not show any signs of panic. At the very least, he still had a few advantages. The first was his relationship with the Druids, the second was his relationship with Sifrid, and the third was his familiarity with the Black Forest. Especially the third point, which no one could compare to. But as he was thinking, he suddenly heard a cry of surprise. The crowd started to panic, as if something terrible had happened. Brendel raised his head and felt Coden nudging him from the side. Boy, look at the sky. What's wrong? Brando raised his head in confusion. Then he saw a scene that he could not believe. Right in front of his eyes, that majestic and seemingly endless cloud wall, the loop of trade winds, was slowly moving to the sides, as if it was opening a giant door that had existed since ancient times. Time seemed to slow down and accelerate at the same time. It was as if a crack had appeared on the wall of clouds. The crack was only a thin line in the sky, but it was easy to imagine how big it was. The path in the clouds. Brendel blurted out subconsciously as he stared at the wall of clouds with his mouth agape. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 382. That afternoon, the loop of trade winds had shaken the entire Green Tower. But that wasn't necessarily a good thing. The Druid Council became tense almost overnight, and the small town became turbulent. That night, the envoys from the Kurlet's Empire visited the inn where the members of Aween and the Holy Cathedral of Fire were staying. Privately, some groundless rumors began to spread. There was a rumor that pointed out that the large-scale magic reaction in Chablis was due to the awakening of a legendary holy sword. It was said to be King Eric's Lionheart sword, and the person who spread the rumor claimed that Aween had already grasped the method to enter the loop of trade winds to obtain the holy sword. However, another rumor pointed out that the secret was in the hands of a young Erwin. This young man had gotten into a serious conflict with the Crew's empire in the afternoon, and was rescued by the Druids. The second piece of news piqued the interest of the spies. The mighty Kurlet's empire actually suffered a loss at the hands of the Druids because of an Aween citizen. The subtext of this was enough to make any busybody speculate. At the same time, a Lionmane mercenary group from the Barbarian Mountain region received a piece of news. According to a legend in their hometown, the Halrangaya that the Lionmane Empire and the dwarves fought over had reappeared in the world, and was witnessed to be in the hands of a young man. Another rumor said that the Crew's empire had gotten into a conflict with the young man to obtain the Halrangaya. More news quickly spread among the bars, and some even claimed that Aween had already surrendered to the Holy Church. In short, all kinds of rumors spread like wildfire, and some of them were true and some were false. Perhaps not everyone believed them, but sometimes a conspiracy doesn't require you to truly believe it, because people are always willing to consciously pass on those strange messages. In just one night, the Green Tower was filled with a restless aura due to the changes in the loop of trade winds. Brando didn't know about the changes in his surroundings because he had left the Green Tower the moment the loop of trade winds changed and entered the Witherwood Council with two great druids. At this moment, the Witherwood Council had received the exact information. The loop of trade winds had undergone a drastic change. A tunnel with a width of dozens of kilometers had opened up outside the cloud wall. For the first time, the loop of trade winds had opened its door to travelers other than druids. However, no one knew what was happening in the center of the mountain range. Ever since the mist had retreated, the depths of the Kalenga Mountains had become a very dangerous area. The activity of magical creatures in the mist had become more frequent. In fact, the Druids had already lost a few observation points. The front line was collapsing. The situation seemed to have become tense. There were at least 100 elder-level Druids gathered in the plaza where Goddess Naya was worshipping. The outer circle members who had turned into gray crows were perched on the branches nearby. The entire Witherwood Council was filled with a sense of nervousness as if a storm was about to come. All the elites were deployed. Brendel raised his head and looked at the dark red sky above the green tower. Countless crows were circling around the 6 ancient trees, and they were so dense that they almost covered half of the sky. Looking down from this direction, there were even more Druids draped in cloaks of grass climbing up the vines between the ancient trees. They almost formed a long green dragon that extended outwards. Yes, tens of thousands of Druids were rushing over from the dark forest near the green tower. Naturally, this was a warning to everyone. A war was about to break out. Victory or defeat, it all depended on this. For the first time in 100 years, the Druids of southern Tonajil came out in full force. Everyone. The demons seemed to have come out in full force. A Druid elder's voice was as loud as thunder and lightning in a storm. Our brothers and sisters at the front line can't stop their attacks and are retreating. From the sky, the monsters in the forest look like a black ocean. The edge of the black ocean is flowing down the forest. It has already drowned the circle of thorns, the wall of roses, and the ring of storms. Another Druid flew down from the tree and turned back into his human form from the gray crow, and said loudly, "We will counterattack immediately. We have to stop these magical creatures. They will destroy all the observation points at the front line. Our 100 years of hard work in the Black Forest will go to waste." The Druids roared. The Grand Elder knocked on the ground with his wooden staff. The crisp sound caused the chaotic scene to calm down. "How many magical creatures are there?" the Grand Elder asked. "Countless," the first Druid replied. "Countless." Brando stood behind the Grand Elder's back. No one noticed him for a while. He turned his gaze away from the blood-red sky and looked down at the city below the green tower. The city seemed so far away from the Witherwood Council. All that was left was a dazzling light. Of course, he didn't know what was happening there. But the Druid's reply reminded him of something. "Countless." Brando looked up and saw a leaf falling from the sky. He caught it with his hand and turned it over. He watched as the leaf slowly drifted into the night. It drifted into the endless black abyss below. "My lord." The Grey Crow Great Druid was dissatisfied with Brendel's absent-mindedness. "What do you think of the changes in the loop of trade winds? May I ask a question?" Brando raised his head and looked at the Druid. At this time, the First Elder also happened to hear their conversation. He thought for a moment, rolled up his sleeve and took a step back, then nodded slightly to Brendel. "Please." The scene fell into silence. It was as if someone had just noticed the presence of a human. "Who's that young man? He seems to be a guest of the council. But he looks like a human. He seems to be Lady Sifrit's relative." "I see." The Druids began to whisper among themselves. "But what is he doing here?" Brendel did not decline the Great Elder's gesture. Instead, he took a step forward and raised his head to look at the Druid Elder who had been reporting to him. "Where did the magic beasts come from?" The Great Druid was taken aback. "From the mist. Endless? Endless. Uncountable? Uncountable." The Great Druid did not understand why Brando would ask such a question. "The demonic wave," Brando answered with certainty. His memories seemed to overlap, and the experience of 2 different dimensions merged into one. Like the rising of the moon, the first demonic wave will last for 7 long nights. The withering of the flower buds signifies the withering of life. The howling of the wolves under the moon signifies the arrival of a calamity. The first calamity of civilization is the calamity of the wolves. "This is the calamity of the wolves," Brando answered. "The magical creatures you see are black wolves." Calamity of the wolves. The Druids' faces changed as they began to discuss among themselves. The calamity of the wolves was said to be a calamity that would bring chaos to the world, but how could it be related to the changes in the loop of trade winds? The changes in the loop of trade winds are related to the demonic wave. The calamity of the wolves is just the beginning, but the beginning is equally fatal. The demonic wave will soon pass through here and sweep through the entire loop of trade winds. Then they will hibernate until the true arrival of the demonic wave. Then they will return and bring destruction to the world. As Brando spoke, his thoughts seemed to have returned to the exciting era in the game. The demonic wave brought about the beginning of chaos. The ancient empire was on the verge of collapse, and the flame of civilization was like a candle flickering in the wind. This was the core of the second chapter, War and Chaos. However, heroes appeared and shone like stars, igniting sparks of fire that burned the land. He seemed to see flags struggling to move forward in the light of the fire: Valkyrie Freya, Duke Aranja, Running Wolf Walter, King of Fury Kanan. Heroes from different eras and races appeared one after another. They led the players and their people to break through the thorns in the darkness. However, the long sword plowed through the blood-soaked ground, the flames burned away the pale thorns, and the blood-boiling battles seemed to have yet to extinguish the warmth in the chest. But as long as the warmth remained, the civilization would never fall. Brando felt the glory of the past. It was the calamity of wolves that happened in the waning years of the demonic wave. This was the calamity of wolves that happened at the beginning of the Year of Swords. The creatures that walked in the shadows would soon sweep through the dark forest and destroy all order in their path. Brando did not experience this war, but he knew that someone else had, and he could empathize with it. Then the young lord turned his head and calmly asked, "Where are they going?" No one knew. But after a moment of silence, a gray crow descended from the sky and landed in the middle of the square. It turned into a young druid. The young druid looked at everyone and said with a serious expression, "The demonic wave swept through the wall of roses and changed direction. They are heading for the Green Tower." His voice echoed in the square. The druids fell silent. This time, everyone understood the seriousness of the problem. "Is there any way?" the great elder asked. "Make sure that the Green Tower's fire seed doesn't go out, and make sure that there are as many fire seeds as possible," Brando replied. "Apart from that, I want to enter the center of the loop of trade winds. Right now." Grey Crow glanced at him. 7 long nights. You will face the darkest aspect of the power of chaos. The sun will no longer rise. That is the eternal night, Brando asked. Can the Green Tower last until then? This is the only way. Ignite the sacred flame of Valhalla, he replied. Valhalla. The druids were stunned. Can you do it? The great elder asked. I need help, Brando replied. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 383. It was early in the morning. However, the forest was still shrouded in darkness and silence. Only the white fog permeated the forest, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill. The edges of the rows of spears reflected the cold light of the bonfire, sending chills down one's spine. The druids searched the forest in groups. The rustling of leaves could be heard from afar, breaking the deathly silence. Someone coughed, and the air was filled with the choking smell of blood. When Brando arrived, the druids on the front lines had already organized a counterattack and reclaimed part of the Wall of Roses. He stood in the middle of the forest and looked into the distance. In the darkness, the grayish-yellow grass was covered with the corpses of black wolves. These corpses would shrink in a day or two and turn into pure magic crystals. As for the druids' corpses, they had already been taken care of by their own people. The druids' burial culture was quite primitive. It could be said that they were returning to nature. They only needed to be cleaned up a little before burying them. The night's battle was indescribably bitter. Fortunately, the black wolves had already circled around the Vine Valley to the north and were planning to surround the Green Tower first. Thus, the druids were able to evade the enemy's attacks by leaving an empty space in the middle. However, the druids were only able to reclaim a small piece of forest. The monsters retreated into the darkness and seemed to be preparing for a new wave of attacks. Brando wasn't the only one here. In fact, all the factions in the Green Tower were here. The Cruz Empire, Buga's Wizards, the Holy Cathedral of Fire, and even some adventurers. Brando thought that most people would leave the area when the Black Wolf tide arrived, but he had miscalculated. It seemed that the changes in the loop of trade winds and the temptation of the divine artifact were enough to suppress the threat of the Black Wolf tide. But at least it would relieve some of the pressure on him. The only problem was that there would be a battle before he could enter Valhalla. He wasn't worried about the crew's empire, but the Buga wizards. Fortunately, it seemed like Buga's wizards were not familiar with the changes in the loop of trade winds, which was his biggest advantage. Brando looked into the darkness in the distance. He knew that the sun would never rise again. For 7 long nights, the Green Tower would have to face an endless number of monsters. There were 3,000 players in the Green Tower, but now he was the only one. It was still a question whether he could reverse history on his own. Scarlet and Amandina sat beside him while Brando leaned against a white poplar tree. He listened to Amandina's report on the movements of the other factions in the Green Tower last night, while he opened his interface to make his final preparations. Although the calamity of wolves at the beginning of the Year of the Sword was limited to the Black Forest, as the first large-scale storyline in the Amber Sword, the difficulty was beyond imagination. For this reason, Brando had to be prepared for everything. The first step was to increase his own strength. As a veteran player, Brando knew this very well. There was no environmental factor that was more reliable than his own strength. He first opened his attribute panel. However, their adventuring experience did not increase much in the past month. The only time they gained more experience was during the battle with the 5-headed serpent lizard in the middle of the month of sleep. After that, their experience stopped at around 57,000, which was still a short distance away from leveling up as a mercenary. What's more, leveling up a character by 1 level didn't have much of an effect on one's strength. Therefore, Brando didn't stay on this page for long. The green light in his eyes fluctuated, and then the light net paused for a moment. The Planeswalker system. Brando flipped through the pages and quickly found the resource column. It had been almost 3 months since the trip to the Schaflund mine. During this time he only paid 100 wealth to unlock the Silver Swallowtail flag. With the Silver Swallowtail flag's buff, Brando already had a considerable amount of wealth. He then looked down and saw the number of resources he had. Wealth, 2220. Reputation, 330. Brando saved up so much wealth just to unlock the Delos Freeport that required 2,500 wealth. Delos Freeport could generate 20 wealth per day, and tapping it would also give him gems and reputation. It was the most important card to maintain the Platinum Angel. But now he had to stop this plan and reconsider. Brando opened the sealed card book and pointed at the cards he needed one by one. First of all, there were 3 bloodline cards: Vampire Baron, Vampire Throne, and Night Lord. Although Brando was more optimistic about the white cards in the book, he was still lacking in white cards. Even if he could summon them, he might not be able to afford the cost of maintaining them. But bloodline cards were different. The bloodline cards of Fate had a special feature, which was that the host only needed to pay for the cost of maintaining them. This was extremely troublesome for spellcasters, but for a warrior like him it didn't seem to hurt at all. Not to mention he also had the unyielding talent, which allowed him to recover 3 times faster than the average person. He paid 400,000, 600 and 800 wealth respectively to unlock the 3 cards. Then, he scanned them and put them into his deck. The Vampire Baron, Night Shadow 11, 10 Dark Creature Undead Vampire, Level 28 Creature Vampire. When Vampire Baron is on the battlefield, add 1 battle counter to all lower level vampires. When Vampire Baron is on the battlefield, pay 2 life per day. Elegance in the Dark is a deadly art. Blood Throne Vampire, Night Shadow 6, 15 Dark Creature Undead Vampire, Level 30 Elite Vampire. Sacrificing 1 non-black creature to add 3 battle counters to the Blood Throne Vampire until the reset stage. When Vampire Throne is on the battlefield, pay 5 life per day. Lowly people often forget that they are not guests or servants but property. Night Lord, Night Shadow 3, 15 Dark Creature Undead Vampire, Level 35 Elite Vampire. Pay 5 dark to place a small group of black derivatives, Bloodline, into the battlefield. When Vampire Throne is on the battlefield, pay 10 life per day. Blood is dripping. These 3 cards could be said to be a set of cards. Although Vampire Baron was only at the pinnacle of Black Iron, it could provide bonuses to lower-level vampires. On the other hand, the Blood Throne Vampire strength was not on par with Medusa's. After sacrificing a non-black creature card, the Blood Throne Vampire could reach the pinnacle of gold in a short period of time. This was the strongest card that he could obtain at this stage. As for Night Lord, it was already at the middle level of gold. If it kept paying dark EP, it could create more derivatives. Together with Vampire Baron's ability, it was like adding wings to a tiger. Brando planned to use these 3 cards as his other core card deck, other than the Holy Sword Wind Spirit Spider. Even if it was not for this purpose, with the addition of Vampire Throne and Night Lord, he would have 7 gold-level existences in his hands. This was already considered a strong force in Erewhon. As for the remaining wealth, he spent another 550 to activate the Ocean Wave Gem and Grey Harbor Tax Officer. Ocean Wave Gem 1000 Sceneries v. 10 Any treasure magic item. When Ocean Wave Gem is on the battlefield, provide 1 reputation per day. Tap it to gain 2 wealth. Sacrifice this card to choose any card in your hand to enter the battlefield for free. Unstoppable Temptation Grey Harbor Tax Officer, City-States Alliance XXI, 5 Light Treasure, Human Official, Level 5 Creature. When Grey Harbor Tax Officer is on the battlefield, provide 1 reputation per day. Tap it to gain 2 wealth as long as you have a city-building land card. Enchantment. Taxation is the foundation of the city. The purpose of activating these 2 cards was to make up for the losses that were not part of the plan. Since he could not achieve the Platinum Angel's requirement in 1 step, he could only choose a more complicated path. Fortunately, these 2 cards could increase both reputation and wealth, which met the requirements. After using wealth, Brando used reputation to activate the Graveyard Resurrection spell. Graveyard Resurrection, Graveyard Whispers 2, 20 Dark, Spell Enchantment. Put any target artifact or creature card that has died, or is in the graveyard, into the battlefield under your control. This creature has an additional black and spirit figurine category. Death is not an excuse for disobeying orders. The Graveyard Resurrection card costs 325 reputation to unlock. It could directly resurrect a dead creature into the battlefield as a black card. Other than the time of death, there was almost no other exemption. Brando believed that he would meet a target that he liked in this demonic wave, so he decisively took this card. At this point, the young lord had used up all the reputation and wealth that he had saved up over the past few months. However, these were not all the land cards he had. He took out another 5 cards from his waist pouch. They were 2 black land cards, Water of the Underworld and Forest of Death, and a gray land card, Anju's Mountains. The other 2 cards were the Fireclaw Trumpeter and the Rune Summoner. These 5 cards were exchanged from the Wandering Magician with 3 moon crystals. Apart from the land card, the rest of the Fireclaw Trumpeter and the Rune Summoner gave him a big surprise. The Fireclaw Trumpeter and the Fireclaw Lizardman belonged to the same deck. This card could summon an intermediate iron-ranked Fireclaw Trumpeter. However, this card was not the most outstanding thing about it. The significance of this card was that as long as the Fireclaw Trumpeter was on the battlefield, it could duplicate an identical red derivative card for every Fireclaw Pikeman card on the battlefield. In other words, as long as the Fireclaw Trumpeter was on the battlefield, a Fireclaw Pikeman card was equivalent to 2 Fireclaw Pikeman cards entering the battlefield at the same time. Although Brando only had 1 Fireclaw Pikeman card in his hand, he believed that one day, this card would be as powerful as the Holy Sword Art and the Wind Spirit Spiders. As for the Rune Summoner, it had almost the same ability as the Night Lord. The difference was that as long as the Planeswalker paid 10 mana, the Rune Summoner could summon a gray derivative with the same level of land cards as the Planeswalker had. This was a card that was weak in the early stages, but had almost unlimited potential in the later stages. Brando also swept these 5 cards into his deck. Now that the capacity of his deck had greatly increased, excluding the land cards, he still had 15 cards of various types. This meant that he could no longer grab all the cards in his deck at once. When the number of cards increased, Brando found himself facing a new problem. The cards that he could use every day had become random, and how to grab the cards had become a new problem. He first checked his hand. Bloodborne Vampire, Wind Spirit Spiders, Holy Sword Art, Fire Djinn, Sprint Drive, Energy Drain, and Fireclaw Trumpeter. However, Brando did not summon them immediately, because he felt Amandina nudging him from the side. Only then did Brando raise his head and return to his senses from his own world. He immediately saw a group of people walking towards him from the edge of the forest not far away. They were not druids. They were a group of humans, a group of Erewhon's people. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 384. What are they doing here? Brando thought to himself. The Erewhon nobles slowed down not far from Brando, and they seemed to be observing him. Brando recognized these people. The leader was a middle-aged man with a thin face and a slight limp. He seemed to be called Count Audine, a high-ranking officer of the Northern Legion. The 6 men and 2 women behind him were probably nobles with no real power. Brando could not remember their names, but he had an impression of their faces. These people were basically from the royal faction, or at least the centrist faction. However, there were some who were from the traditional faction of the kingdom before the split. This made Brando even more certain that these people were sent into the dark forest before the internal strife in Erewhon. But how did they know about the Lionheart? Brando did not know that during the Battle of Fortress Reden, the Wolf Knight Oberway had been following them and knew all the secrets of the White Knight Ebden. That was why the Erewhon had sent people into Randner before the divine artifact reacted. However, when he was observing these people, Count Audine's gaze also fell on him. The general of the Northern Phoenix Legion from Erewhon could tell that this young man was a noble at first glance. His calm and elegant demeanor could not be faked, and Amandina beside him was clearly a noble's daughter. Every movement of hers carried a unique demeanor. To be able to accompany such a young lady, there was no need to doubt his identity. Count Audine glanced at the young men who were resting in the forest. He thought that they must be this young noble's retinue. However, there were lizard men, elves and Erewhon people. The composition of the people was quite complicated. He then turned his head and his gaze fell on Brando again. People from Erewhon? Brendel nodded, thinking that these guys probably did not come here just to reunite with a fellow villager like him. As expected, before Count Audine could open his mouth, a short and fat noble beside him spoke first. You are that noble from Erewhon? Are you not a noble from Erewhon? Brando raised an eyebrow when he heard the unfriendly tone in the other person's voice. The short and fat noble was startled. Brando of course recognized him. He was a famous conservative and his name was Robert. Robert was in his 80s and had maintained himself well. The crew's race had a longer lifespan than humans, so he looked like a middle-aged man. Even though his beautiful curly hair was dyed with a layer of white, it was still combed neatly. This fat count was wearing a silver count's robe. His hat was adorned with 3 golden leaves, which represented his status as a count. Normally, counts would wear 3 silver leaves, and these 3 golden leaves were obviously a special honor. However, he was obviously shocked by Brando's words. He did not expect Brando to reply in such a way. After being stunned for a while, he shouted angrily. Whether I am a noble from Erewhon or not has nothing to do with you, boy. Let me ask you, are you the one who offended the crew's empire this afternoon and brought trouble to the kingdom? Brando's face darkened. He already knew what these people were here for. They were here to denounce him. As for why they were here to denounce him, he only needed to think about what happened in the Centaur's Hoof Market yesterday afternoon to be able to guess the reason. Brando could not help but shake his head. Erewhon, oh Erewhon. He looked at these officials of the kingdom and could not help but be speechless. If you are asking me if I taught some arrogant bastard a lesson this afternoon, that is me. Brando stared coldly at the other party and replied. But as for who brought trouble to the kingdom, that is unknown. He looked at the fat man with a mocking gaze. The meaning in his eyes was self-evident. It's good that you admit it. Dolent did not care about Brando's gaze. He only replied. The crew's empire has already informed us that if we do not hand you over to them within the time limit, they will threaten the kingdom with war. Boy, do as you see fit. So you want to hand me over? Brando looked at these people and asked with amusement. Do you think that is possible? This is an order. This time it was a middle-aged noble lady who spoke. She wore the uniform of a government official, but she wore the badge of a scholar. Brando immediately recognized her identity as a warlock of the Wong family of Lantanailan. An order? Brando almost laughed. From whom? In the name of the kingdom. The lady said. We are a group of ambassadors sent here by His Majesty. We represent His Majesty and the dignity of the kingdom. Therefore I order you, young noble, to put down your weapons and come with us. Or else. or else your actions will be suspected of involving the kingdom in war. We have reason to declare that your actions have violated the common code of the nobles of Erewhon. In other words, we can declare that you are expelled from Erewhon. From now on, your actions have nothing to do with the kingdom. Brendel could not help but take a deep breath when he heard this sentence. Even if he had good self-control, he could not help but take in a deep breath. Fortunately, he had seen the ugly faces of these people in the game. Otherwise, he would have been pissed to death. He turned to look at Count Audine, a high-ranking general of the Northern Legion and a die-hard supporter of the Princess Regent. He asked, "As a soldier, do you think so too, Count Audine?" But Audine did not answer. He only frowned slightly. Firstly, he was dissatisfied with Dolant's words. Secondly, he did not like Dolant's carelessness. Although Cruz's envoy threatened him with war as a soldier, he was not afraid of war. But now that Erewhon was facing both internal and external threats, he had no choice but to stand on the same side as these nobles. Count Audine's silence disappointed Brando. He had thought that the future leader of the Reformist Party would at least support him. But now Brando realized that he was right to jump out of Erewhon's rotten circle of nobles and start a new life. The nobles of the kingdom were hopeless. He finally managed to suppress his anger and looked up at the female scholar with a smile. "So you're saying that you want to expel me from Erewhon? That depends on your choice," the last noble answered. Brendel almost pulled out his sword and slashed these bastards away. He immediately calmed himself down and looked at them with an angry smile and replied, "You're right. Very well, then you can tell the Lurts that I have been expelled from the kingdom. Maybe they will accept it." The nobles of Erewhon were stunned. They were threatening Brando. But it would be strange if the Cruz's people would accept it. Those nobles would only accept it if they saw it. Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, Count Robron said angrily. He raised his hand and prepared to have the envoy's guards subdue the young man. The envoy's guards were the kingdom's knights and were the elites of the Corvado royal family. Subduing a young noble should not be a problem. He had observed Brando's retainers beforehand. They were either youths or of other races. This kind of ragtag group could not be that strong. On the other hand, although the Cruz's people said that Brando had offended them, they did not mention Brando's glorious deeds in order to save face. They only vaguely mentioned the conflict that happened in the afternoon at Centaur's Hoof Market. This caused the Erewhon's envoy to misjudge Brando. They thought that Brando had some strength, but that was all there was to it. Before the calamity of wolves, they tried to preserve their strength as much as possible. But Brando was determined to resist, so they could not be blamed for taking action. Robron Audine and the female scholar had the same idea. No matter what, they could not let the kingdom be involved in a new war. But as soon as he finished speaking, he saw Brando smile at him. "It seems that you want to force me to submit?" he asked. "Naturally. Then it seems that the Cruz's people did not tell you the truth." Brendel laughed. "If you really know the cause and effect of the whole thing, I'm afraid you'll be more cautious with your current actions. Stop bluffing." Robron snorted. "Bluffing?" Brando shrugged. "Well, Cruz's people did not tell you. First of all, I offended the only heir of the Empire's Grand Duke of Flower Leaf. I made this noble's daughter lose face in front of everyone." Count Audine was stunned. He thought that Brando had a conflict with Cruz's people, but he did not expect it to be like this. Count Audine immediately felt troubled. According to the Grand Duke's temper, he might really start a war. But Audine did not expect that Brando was not done yet. The young lord continued. "Also, Cruz's people did not tell you that I also offended the Empire's Border Knight Regiment. I beat up a whole squadron of their people." The female noblewoman was about to say something, but her face changed when she heard this. One person beat up a whole squadron of Cruz's Border Knight Regiment? She looked at Brendel and thought to herself, this guy's bragging too much. The Curlet's people didn't tell you either. I also offended the Empire's Flower of Knights, Count Cullens, who was known as the swordsman of the new generation 10 years ago. I remember that I used a spell to send him flying. I don't know if he has recovered yet, Brendel said with a smile. I hope there aren't any scars on his face. I also offended the Imperial Guard's Knight Regiment. I disarmed their entire squadron. Oh, and their Royal Alchemist Association. I almost killed one of their geniuses, a 15-year-old war alchemist. The young man nodded. Also, I seem to have offended someone. Veronica, the commander of the Azure Firmament Regiment. You should know her. I fought with her for 10 moves. In the end, I threatened her with the daughter of the Grand Duke of Flowerleaf and forced her to retreat. He turned around and looked at Roburn's people. If Cruz's people told you this, would you still want to take me away by force? Then he stopped and looked at these people. Also, you want me to apologize to the Kurlutzians? He asked. Then may I ask, which of the Kurlutzians do you think I should apologize to for the above? Author's note. I came back a little late. Sorry OTL. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com and read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 385. Erwin's envoy group was stunned by Brando's words. Count Dolan's short and fat hand moved in the air, but he did not swing down. The forest was filled with a strange silence. The bonfire in the distance flickered, and the crackling sound of burning charcoal could be heard. The sound was so clear that even a pin drop could be heard. Brendel could see the disbelief in their eyes. Robert's hand was raised halfway. The female scholar was covering her mouth, and Audine's hand was hanging down from his sword. Everyone looked at the young noble as if they were looking at a madman. So what do you plan to do next? Brendel asked with a gentle expression, his voice as light as the breeze in the night. The noble's lips twitched. Tisk, those fellows can't even control their own people. How useless. Vahina hid behind a rock and stared at the confrontation between Brando and Erwin's envoy group with dissatisfaction. If this goes on, we won't be able to achieve our goal. As she spoke, she could not help but turn to look at Viscount Elman with a hint of complaint. The young Viscount was not annoyed and smiled. Don't worry, the best part is yet to come. As if to prove his words, Brando suddenly turned his head to the side of the forest. Who's there? He roared, and the Halran Gaia in his hand flew out of its sheath like a beam of black light, knocking away a crossbow bolt that flew out of the forest. The arrow's first target was Count Audine, but it was slightly off target and went straight for the female scholar behind him. The noble lady did not react in time. If not for Brando's help, she would have been dead by now. But Brando could protect one of them, but he could not defend against more. Count Dolant was hit by an arrow the moment he made his move. Fortunately, the fat man had some swordsmanship foundation. Although he was rusty, he managed to avoid being hit in the shoulder at the last moment. The noble who lived like a prince had never suffered such an injury before. He immediately howled like a pig being slaughtered. Who's there? Count Audine's reaction was only a step slower than Brando's, but someone dared to ambush them at this time. The general from the Northern Legion was shocked and angry. He immediately pulled out his sword and faced the direction of the attack. Brendel's brows furrowed as he looked at the broken crossbow bolt on the ground. With his rich experience, he was able to analyze a lot of things the moment the bolt was destroyed. At least this arrow is not the work of a double crossbow. Judging from the strength, it should be the effect of an alchemy weapon. Erwin's people did not have the habit of using crossbows, so Brando's first thought was that it was an ambush arranged by these people. And he felt that the arrow was aimed at Count Audine. Erwin's party have enemies here? He turned around and saw a group of black figures in the forest. The black figures moved quickly. It was as if they had surrounded the party as soon as they appeared in the forest. There were at least a few hundred of them. Brando squinted his eyes and saw the appearance of the attackers. He could not help but be stunned. They were humanoid creatures with the backs of bears and the waists of bears. Every one of them had the head of a lion. Gray gold manes hung down from the lion's face like whiskers and fell to the inlaid leather armor below. Their palms were also furry claws, but they were much more slender than their four-legged cousins. They wore leather boots and carried all kinds of weapons. Toquinen's golden mane lion men. Count Audine called out. The hundreds of golden mane lion mane beastmen stopped. Then 2 burly golden mane lion mane beastmen, who were almost a head taller than the ordinary lion mane beastmen, walked out. The one in the lead had a long scar on his face, which almost divided his thin eyes into two. The one behind him seemed to be his adjutant, who stopped one step behind him. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rovak. Sorry to disturb you. When the first golden mane lion man smiled, the muscles on his face twitched, causing the red scars on his face to distort. Toquinen's lion men, what are you doing? The general's face darkened. Are you trying to start a war? Rovak ignored him and pointed his sword at Brando. Kid, hand over the sword in your hand. The expression of the Erewhon nobles changed. Even though Rovak was targeting Brando, his arrogance almost made Count Audine and Count Dolent, who was lying on the ground, explode with anger. They could cause trouble for Brando because they were nobles of Erewhon. They could tolerate the Kurlutzians ordering them around because of the prestige of the Eagle Empire. But who the hell were these barbarians? When Erewhon was founded, the Golden Mane Lion Men were just a small tribe on the northwest border of the kingdom. They fought with the Erewhon for many years and suffered many losses. In the end, they were tamed and retreated to the mountains. Even though the kingdom had been declining for the past 100 years, and the Golden Mane Lion Men on the border had been acting strangely, they did not expect them to be so arrogant. Not only did they surround and attack Erewhon's envoy, but they were also fearless. The first thought that came to Audine's mind was that these unevolved beasts had found someone to rely on, but he could only think of the Cruz people. This was obviously not possible. Compared to Toquinen, Erewhon still believed in the Holy Cathedral of Fire. In the eyes of the Cruz people, these guys were real beasts. They would never stand behind these beasts to fight against Erewhon. That would be against the teachings of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. But other than that, Audine could not think of any other reason for these beasts to be so arrogant. Of course, he did not act rashly. The enemy had hundreds of people in the forest, while they only brought 20 or 30 guards to Brando. It was obvious who would be at a disadvantage if they fought. He exchanged glances with Dolent. Although both of them thought that they had to teach these uncivilized two-legged cats a lesson, they knew better than to fight when the odds were against them. At least for now, they had to calm them down and return to the camp first. Audine's face turned cold and he asked in a deep voice, Rovak, aren't you worried about the consequences? Or do you think that we are the only people in Erewhon's envoy? Rovak narrowed his eyes, as if he had only just noticed the presence of other people besides Brando. He sneered and licked his paws, looking at the people in front of him with his light yellow prismatic eyes. Indeed, he would not have dared to do this before. But before he came here, he had learned an important piece of news from Cruz. The Erewhon in the outside world was now divided and could not start a war. To his amusement, these Erewhon nobles, who were usually high and mighty, did not seem to know about this. He was looking forward to seeing their expressions later. Toquinen had been eyeing Erewhon's rich lands for a long time, and he finally had this opportunity in the past 10 years. Since he was going to fall out sooner or later, he did not care if it was today or tomorrow. Besides, Cruz had also told him that Haurangaya was now in the hands of the Erewhon people. This news was even more important to him. Haurangaya was originally a sacred object in the wilderness. It was said that whoever held this sacred sword could unite the people of the mountains and the land. The Golden Lion Mane Beastmen had thought that the sword was lost in the mountains of Anwa, and had fought with the dwarves for it for hundreds of years. They did not expect that it would appear here. They had originally come for the rumors of the divine weapon. Now that there was no sign of it, it was not a bad idea to find the sword first. Consequences. Rovak saw the expressions on the faces of the Erewhon nobles and could not help but sneer. If you had said this a few decades ago, I might have been worried. But now it seems that you do not know the situation in your country, do you? Audine was stunned. What do you mean? Someone asked. Your country is now divided into two. The lords in your country are fighting each other. Only you have the leisure to explore here and look for treasures, right? The tall Golden Lion Mane Beastman smiled. Its words were like a bolt of lightning that struck all the Aween nobles present, causing their faces to turn pale. Of course, they knew the situation in Aween. The old king had ordered them to search for the Lionheart sword in the south in order to save the kingdom's fate, but they did not expect the kingdom to fall into discord before they could do anything. What was going on? Was this really the will of Lady Martha? But just when everyone's hearts were in a mess, Brendel finally spoke up. I'm sorry, he replied softly. I didn't hear what you said to me just now. Can I trouble you to say it again? Brando's hand that was holding the Haurangaya sank slightly, and his face was as cold as water. He felt that the anger in his chest could burn the world. Brando was already annoyed by these people who came to question him for no reason. He was ready to teach these people a lesson on behalf of the future Princess Regent. But he did not expect that. At this time, someone would actually walk into his line of fire. When the tall golden lion-mane beastman pointed his sword at him and asked him to hand over the Halran Gaia in a disrespectful tone, he almost could not help but cut this guy in half. Not to mention that the other party ignored him and mocked him as much as he could. What the hell, do you think you're trying to draw aggro? Brando took a deep breath. If this guy was trying to draw aggro, he had to congratulate him. He had succeeded. I say. Rovak was completely unaware of the approaching danger. In his opinion, how powerful could a young man be? He was a warrior of Toquinen, and he had attained gold-tier combat strength more than a decade ago. Otherwise, he would not have been sent here to find the divine artifact. So in the face of Brando's threat, he just smiled casually and said, "I want you to hand over the sword." But before he could finish his sentence, Brando had already shot a black line at him, and the young lord raised his hand. It was just one strike. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 386. I say. Rovak was completely oblivious to the approaching danger. In his opinion, how powerful could a young man be? He was a warrior of Toquinen and had attained gold-tier combat strength more than a decade ago. Otherwise, he would not have been sent here to search for the divine artifact. Therefore, in the face of Brando's threat, he just smiled and said, "I want you to hand over the sword." Before he could finish his sentence, Brando had already shot towards him, leaving a black line in his wake. Then the young lord raised his hand. It was just one strike. There was no military swordsmanship, no White Raven sword style, and Brando did not even use any fancy moves. The dark blade of the sword was like a meteor as it swung towards Rovak. The golden mane lion-mane beastman's expression changed, and he immediately raised his sword to parry. Unfortunately, what awaited him was Brando's strength burst and breakthrough. Brando, in a fit of rage, used these two extremely exhausting skills without reservation for the first time. The master-level strength burst increased his strength by 3 times in an instant, pushing his strength to the peak of gold tier at 443 ounces. The Ghost Knight's crystal also increased his strength to the elemental realm by 30%. Everyone saw that at that moment, Halran Gaia in Brando's hand bent automatically as if it was refracted in the air. Then with a loud clang, it collided with Rovak's broadsword. It was a sound that made one's teeth ache. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. The tall golden lion-mane beastman watched as the broadsword in his hand bent to the limit, cracked, broke, and then shattered into pieces. The metal fragments shot back like steel needles and hit the golden lion-mane beastman. Normally, these fragments would not be able to hurt his gold-tier body. But at this moment, these steel needles seemed to contain the same power as they pierced into his body. He screamed in pain. But as soon as the scream came out of his mouth, it stopped abruptly. The huge lion-mane beastman had been swept away by a powerful force. Due to the force, his upper body was bent backward, and then his entire lower body was torn apart along with his spine. Then with a swoosh, he dragged his broken legs and flew far away. He shot into the forest, leaving a trail of blood behind him. There was a muffled sound. At this moment, the others finally recovered from their shock. The few lionmen standing closest to Rovak subconsciously unsheathed their swords, wanting to charge forward. Unfortunately, what awaited them was an even more tragic fate. "Earth, give me your blade!" Brando roared. A loud crash was heard. With Brando's sword as the center, the ground 100 meters in front of him instantly split open, and sharp rocks shot out from the ground. Like a storm, stalagmites that were 2 to 3 meters long, and as thick as a bowl were formed out of thin air. Along with a swooshing noise, the sword rocks spread out in all directions. Within a breath, a forest of sharp swords was formed, covering an area with a diameter of thousands of feet. More than 20 golden mane lion-mane beastmen were pierced like hedgehogs in an instant. Patter. The black-haired young alchemist, Rono, dropped a dagger on the ground. He was dumbfounded as he watched the scene unfold outside the forest. Vahina, the noble lady with 2 ponytails, was even more shocked. There were still a few spots of blood on her white face, left behind by the golden mane lion mane beastman's corpse when it flew past her. If it was any other time, Vahina would be disgusted to death. But now, she did not even have the courage to make a sound or blink her eyes. Of the three, only Viscount Elman was slightly calmer, but when he saw that sword, his heart couldn't help but skip a beat. The only thought in his mind was that he was thankful that he didn't go looking for trouble with that guy himself. He had seen Duke Veronica's swordsmanship before, but even though her swordsmanship was impressive, it still lacked the power to shock people. When Brendel drew his sword, the unstoppable force was so strong that even though they were hundreds of meters away, they could almost feel the wind and rain of blood that assaulted their faces. It was as if the sword had pierced through their hearts, causing their hearts to stop. It was a kind of extreme pressure when faced with power. This. Rono was almost speechless. Sword and curse dual cultivator. Elman's expression also changed several times. However, the Erewhon nobles around Brando were the ones whose expressions changed. They originally thought that Brendel was exaggerating when he said those words to them before, but they didn't expect him to do so. But now these people stood there as if they were petrified. Their expressions were strange, and no one could make a sound. The fat Count Dolan, who was lying on the ground, opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but his voice was stuck in his throat for a long time. Count Audine had been in a posture ready to draw his sword. He was prepared to attack if Brando's tone changed, but when he saw Brando draw his sword, he felt as if the sword in his hand weighed more than 1,000 pounds. He could not pull it out no matter how hard he tried. This guy was a noble of the Erewhon? Since when did the Erewhon have such a crazy person? Brando maintained his posture for almost 2 seconds before he let out a sigh of relief. Using power burst and charge at full strength consumed too much energy. If it were not for his innate talent, he would have been frozen for more than 2 seconds. But even so, not a single golden mane lion mane beastman dared to surround him while he was frozen. They could still accept the fact that Shurfong had killed Varric with a single slash, but the terrifying Gaia blade was simply too terrifying. Nearly 100 meters of the ground was instantly lifted up, and countless stone teeth rose from the ground. This scene shocked everyone to their very core. A demon warrior? Or a sword and curse dual cultivator? Brando put down Halran Gaia, and the stone teeth that rose from the ground disintegrated and turned into dust. He then coldly looked at the golden mane lion mane beastmen who wanted to surround him but were scared off. Hundreds of golden mane lion mane beastmen formed a crescent around him, but no one dared to take a step forward. When the late King Eric was still alive, he would never have thought that one day his descendants would be mocked by a group of beasts. Brando turned around and looked at the emissaries of the Erewhon Empire and said, "The glory of the Erewhon Empire's lost flag. The shining glory that flew on the battlefield of the past. Do you think you can pick it up?" Brando's voice was not loud. It could be said that his tone was flat. However, the nobles realized that they could not say a single word of rebuttal, whether it was the fat man on the ground, Count Audine, or the female scholar. Dolent looked at the golden mane lion mane beastman of Toquinen, and then looked at Brando. He was unwilling to admit defeat, but he could not say a word. The female scholar lowered her head and did not answer. Only Audine silently drew his sword. At this time the surviving golden mane beastman finally reacted. Although Brando's sword had shocked everyone present, it had also revealed his strength. Gold tier. Although the strength of a gold tier warrior in his early 20s was shocking, it did not change the balance of power on the battlefield. 1 or 2 gold tier warriors could not change the situation. The golden mane beastman knew that there were at least hundreds of silver tier warriors behind him, not to mention that he and his captain were also gold tier warriors. Among the humans, only this young man and Count Audine were gold tier warriors. The others were not even worth mentioning. The golden mane beastman thought. He had to end the battle before the druids arrived. Kill them. Avenge Lord Rovak. It let out a roar. The roar awakened all the golden mane beastmen. After a moment of commotion, the golden mane beastmen once again surrounded them. This time, however, they were not just facing Brando alone. The youths in the forest had already noticed the commotion when the emissaries of Erewhon clashed with Brando. People like Carglass, who wanted to see the world in chaos, had already rushed over. When Brando drew his sword, They knew that the battle was about to begin. The sound of swords being unsheathed could be heard. Count Audine walked to Brendel's back and tossed the scabbard aside. Let's deal with these troubles first. There's a conflict here, and my men will be here soon. We just need to hold on for a while. Brando replied without turning his head. Hold on. Count Audine was stunned. But Brando had already looked at the golden mane beastmen. Carglass, Coden, Ropar, Scarlet, he shouted, pointing his sword forward. Kill them all. As you wish, my lord. This was Carglass' reply. My lord. Scarlet seemed to have been waiting for this order. She stood in front of Brando, the lightning spear in her hand flashing with electricity. Another gold-tier elemental awakening. The golden mane beastman felt his eyelids twitch. But he soon realized that Scarlet was not the biggest threat on the battlefield. Ropar, the lord of the Fireclaw lizardmen, remained silent as usual. He only took a step forward, turned around, and used his huge tail to sweep the golden mane beastmen who rushed up from the left flank. Then, the tall lizardman swung his double-ended sword horizontally, and a row of golden mane beastmen were turned into charcoal at the same time. In just one exchange, the golden mane beastmen had lost a team. Then he raised his head and stood like a tall wall on the battlefield. The golden mane lion mane beastmen who were blocked in front of him were stunned by his imposing manner. However, Ropar did not waste time talking nonsense. He pointed forward with one of his 3 fingers. Dozens of Fireclaw lizardmen rushed out from behind him like a broken dam. Only Coden unsheathed his sword and walked slowly to Brando's side. I don't think I agreed to work under you, boy. Is that so? Brando asked. At least I didn't agree to take orders from you. This is not my order. Oh. Coden was stunned. Brando glanced at Count Audine and asked, Count, during the reign of the late king, was there anyone who dared to humiliate Erwin's ambassadors? He asked. Audine paused for a moment and shook his head. So, Brando's Halrangaya burst into flames, but he still turned around and asked, Count Audine, how about we use our swords to give Erwin an answer? Audine looked at him and shook his head with a bitter smile. No problem. Brando turned back to look at Coden. Coden did not answer. He just threw the scabbard in his hand, and a green breeze surrounded his body. Elman's eyes twitched. Elemental awakening, intermediate gold rank, another one. Since when did Erwin have so many elites? P.S. I didn't know it would be so late when I went out this morning, so I posted 2 chapters at once. Also, tomorrow is the beginning of the month, you know. Have you prepared the tickets? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 388. Scarlet, Audine, Ropar, and Coden were like 4 sharp blades stabbing into the Lion Beastman's formation. The Lion Beastman's formation was thrown into disarray, but it was only for a moment. Hundreds of silver-ranked warriors surrounded a few gold-ranked warriors, and it seemed like they had a chance of winning. The adjutant of the Lion Beastmen tried his best to keep his people together, hoping to turn the situation around with their advantage in numbers. But he soon realized that it was wishful thinking on his part. Even though they were all gold-ranked warriors, there was still a fundamental difference in their combat power. Scarlet was only a beginner gold-ranked warrior, but she was also the god of Thunder's messenger. She had also absorbed the power of the golden apple. She was already showing signs of entering the middle ranks, and the golden apple was a product that strengthened the coordination of the elements. The electric arc she controlled formed a dense curtain of lightning in front of her. The red-haired girl held an electric spear in her hand. She looked like a legendary knight who could control lightning. With a swing of her spear, several bolts of lightning would sweep into the group of lions. The lightning arcs crackled as they crossed a distance of over 100 feet, leaving a charred hole in the chest of the people who were pierced by them. But this was not the end. Scarlet became braver and braver as she fought, and she seemed to have entered the state of a god. White lightning surged out of her blazing eyes, and she was as majestic as the god of thunder. She did not even use her spear. She only needed to point her finger, and a bolt of lightning would turn a lion beastman into charcoal. Looking from the forest afar, one could only see the white lightning dancing outside. Scarlet stood in the middle of a group of lion beastmen like a god. The duke's daughter stared at all of this with her mouth agape, completely forgetting what they were here for. She only stuttered. "Is that the Lord of Thunder, the daughter of the King of Wind Elves, Cassus?" What a strong elemental perception. The black-haired boy's eyes reflected the white lightning. Elman's expression also changed. Although the red-haired girl looked like she was only a lower gold-ranked warrior, her combat power had already surpassed that of a middle gold-ranked warrior. At least, she was much stronger than the middle-aged gold-ranked swordsman. However, what really made him gasp was not Scarlet but Ropar and Brando. If Scarlet was the god of thunder, then Ropar was the god of fire. The double-headed sword in the hands of this tall lizard-man lord was like dancing flames. Even his body was set ablaze during the battle. However, Ropar did not mind at all. He was originally a creature from the fire elemental world. The Fireclaw lizard looked like a physical existence, but half of its body flowed with fire elements. Moreover, elemental lifeforms had long lifespans. Those who could become lords were all outstanding individuals who had stood out from countless battles. Ropar, the overlord of the Scorching Plains, had accumulated a wealth of battle experience in the fire elemental plane. As long as he drew his sword, a Lion Man would fall. The Lion Man tried to block the god of war with his gold-rank combat strength, but he did not expect the lizard to not dodge at all. Instead, the Lion Man took the Lion Man's sword head-on. The Lion Man raised his head in shock and saw the flames in Ropar's eyes rising. This was the characteristic of the Fireclaw lizards. They loved to fight and use damage to increase their strength. Ropar's HP dropped to less than half, but his strength also increased to the upper gold rank. The Lion Man swordsman probably did not expect his opponent's strength to increase by 2 ranks in an instant. At that moment, he only wanted to pull back his sword to block Ropar's attack. Unfortunately, he did not manage to pull back his sword. Then the flaming sword descended and turned him into a pile of charcoal. Ropar pulled out his sword without saying a word, bringing out a flame, and then casually threw the sword away. He watched as his subordinates were injured in battle, and their strength increased layer by layer. Originally, there were 30 Fireclaw assault spearmen under silver rank. The 30 Fireclaw lizards had now reached the peak of silver rank. The Lionmen could not stop them at all. The Lion Man's left wing was forced to retreat, and for a moment it looked like it was about to collapse. But at this moment, the Lion Man's adjutant did not notice the death of his companions and the pressure on the left wing. He was sweating profusely as he dealt with Brando's attack. In his opinion, the young man was a monster. His aura was clearly that of a lower gold rank, but his combat strength was even more terrifying than that of a peak gold rank. If other people attacked with their sword aura would at most kill 1 or 2 meters away. But Brando raised his sword and created a fire dragon that was dozens of feet long. The young man raised his sword high, and the fire dragon climbed up his silver gauntlet like a golden whirlwind that wrapped around the Howran Gaia. Then he swung his sword down, and a fire pillar that was dozens of feet long instantly engulfed the 34 lion men in front of him and crushed them into ashes. Even if a few escaped, there was a loud bang as the ground cracked inch by inch, and stone teeth pierced out, turning the survivors into hedgehogs. He only used one sword to open a hole in the center of the lionmen's formation. Brando took a step forward, and the lionmen from Toquinen immediately collapsed and retreated. The lionman's adjutant immediately screamed and ordered the lionman crossbowman to prepare to shoot. He intended to use long-range attacks to kill this terrifying guy. The lionmen who came with Toquinen were all elites of the Altar of Earth, and even the crossbowmen were equipped with magic crossbows. When they heard the order, they took a step back and drew their bows. The arms of the bows were surrounded by a faint yellow glow, and it was obvious that the crossbows were enchanted with the power of the earth. Attack! The lionman's adjutant waved his hand. Accompanied by a sharp clanging sound, dozens of pale yellow rays pierced out of the forest in an instant. Their target was Brando, but unfortunately, before they could get close, a fiery red shield suddenly appeared and turned them into ashes. The lionman's adjutant was stunned when he saw the flames around Brando and the failure of all his attacks. If he had the consciousness of a player, he would have cursed. By the name of Martha, just how good is this guy's equipment? Indeed, although Brando was only a lower gold, he could not withstand the buffs of his equipment and skills. At this moment, he was only a little over level 30 in the Amber Sword, and was not even considered a first-rate player. However, the quality of his equipment and the number of skills he had were probably only comparable to the R&B warriors of the same era. Halrangaya, Crimson Blessing, Warrior's Ring, and countless brass and black iron weapons. His defense and constitution alone were better than the knight of the same era, not to mention his attack power. Brando's current attack power was probably enough to put a berserker class to shame. After taking a round of crossbow bolts, Brando finally found the Lion Man's adjutant. He looked up and saw the sneaky guy. He forced the Lion Man to back off with his sword, then took out the shale longbow from his back and aimed at the Lion Man. Dust to dust, earth to earth, petrification arrow. Brando's archery skills were originally inherited from the experience of a level 100 warrior. Back in Fortress Reden, he was not familiar with weapons, but now that he had the weapon mastery of mercenaries, he was confident that he could hit the target at this distance. He released the bowstring, and the arrow shot out like a meteor towards the Lion Man adjutant. The Lion Man adjutant's reaction wasn't slow. He immediately raised his sword to deflect the arrow, but the moment his sword touched the arrow, he turned into a stone statue. Petrification bow. The black-haired youth in the distance almost shouted. If Elman did not cover his mouth. Other than the Viscount, the other descendants of the crew's nobles could not help but sweat a little. Brando was hiding too much power, and it was a little too much for them to take in. However, Rono did not realize that the shale longbow could only create one petrification arrow. He thought that it was the legendary Medusa's petrification bow, which was a legendary fantasy longbow. Coupled with the Crimson Blessing and Halrangaya, it was really a deadly combination. At this moment, the Lion Men finally couldn't hold on any longer. Although they still had the advantage in numbers, Coden, Ropar, and Audine weren't experienced in battle, so they didn't have the chance to utilize their advantage in numbers. Coupled with the death of two of their commanders, the Lion Men were like a headless dragon. Their defense line was shaken and finally collapsed. The first to run was the left wing. Under the attack of a large number of pinnacle silver-ranked Fireclaw lizardmen, they suffered heavy casualties. When they saw the death of their adjutant, they immediately turned and ran. Except for a few who were sent to hell by Ropar, most of them quickly disappeared into the vast black forest. When the left wing collapsed, the center immediately felt the pressure and began to retreat. This retreat led to a large-scale collapse, and in the end, Aween's side was like a duck herding ducks. Even the youths joined the ranks of the ranks to chase after them. However, Brando did not let his men chase too far. He saw that the Lion Men were stopped by the Druids who rushed over. Hundreds of silver-ranked Lion Men could still hold on for a while in front of Brando, but in front of the Druids, who were much more numerous, they were captured in a flash. Therefore, except for a few who escaped into the forest, the rest were all tied up like rice dumplings by the Druids. The result of the battle was not out of Brando's expectations, but it greatly surprised Erwin's ambassadors. When Audine returned to Brando's camp, the Erwin nobles finally realized what they had done. Roland sat there with a gloomy face and did not say a word. Maria helped him treat his wounds. The female scholar and Count Audine came over to thank Brando. They were a little embarrassed because they originally wanted to deal with this young man, but they did not expect to stand on the same side because of the Lion Men. However, Brando saw that they did not know how to deal with the current situation. The Lion Men's words left the nobles in a mess. If the kingdom was already divided, then they did not know what was the point of staying here. Moreover, Cruz's men were also pressuring them. How could they capture Brando? They looked at the young man. Everything that had happened before made them feel that it was just a delusion. Audine even began to suspect that Cruz's men were trying to kill Brendel with a borrowed knife. At this moment, Brando turned around. He heard Carglass calling out to him as he came back from the forest. Although the second son of Lord Maxon was only close to becoming a silver-ranked, his outstanding swordsmanship and clever mind allowed him to defeat two enemies in the previous battle. Compared to Scarlet and the others, this result was not shocking, but compared to the other youths who did not gain anything, he was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Now that Carglass had gained a firm foothold among the youths, Brando had the intention to train him to be the deputy of the Knight's Guard. P.S. As a piece of equipment, the Ghost Knight's crystal's output is similar to the attribute bonus of potions. Therefore, it is also affected by the explosive strength. This is the reason why the price of equipment like the Ogre's Ring is different. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 389. What's the matter, Carglass? My lord, there's a problem. Carglass looked into the forest and replied. In the forest, the druids were interrogating the captured golden mane lion mane beastmen. The members of the Witherwood Council did not expect that someone would dare to cause trouble at the front line. Furthermore, Brando was their ally for the time being. They were furious because what Toquinen was doing was a waste of their time, and time was of the essence at this moment. However, the lion mane beastmen felt wronged. They heard that Erwin's group only brought 20 to 30 guards to cause trouble for Brando. 20 to 30 silver-ranked guards and a few gold-ranked guards were nothing in their eyes. Rovak and his adjutant thought that it would not take much time to wipe them out. However, things did not go as they wished. Cruz did not tell them about Brando's strength, and they ended up being wiped out instead. Of course, Vahina and the others did not intend to harm the lion mane beastmen. In fact, the nobles themselves were shocked. They thought that even if Brando had 1 or 2 gold-ranked guards, they would not be able to fight against hundreds of silver-ranked lion mane beastmen. One must know that although the lionmen did not have any swordsmanship to show off, their racial talent of wild fighting and strength prayer was also a unique combat skill. Therefore, the lionmen's combat power was extremely strong, and ordinary human silver-ranked beings might not necessarily be their match. Unfortunately, Brando did not have any ordinary subordinates. The Fireclaw lizardmen came from the elemental plane, and their fighting strength was no weaker than the lion mane beastmen. Scarlet was the god of thunder, and was almost invincible among gold-ranked warriors. Not to mention, she had absorbed the power of the golden apple. Coden, who looked the most ordinary among them, was an intermediate gold-ranked warrior. He was a veteran of the November War, and his battle experience was so rich that it made one's hair stand on end. As for Brando, his various skills and equipment had already turned him into a gold-ranked monster. Even he himself didn't know how strong he could be when he went all out. Therefore, all of these unexpected circumstances led to the tragedy of the lion mane beastmen. However, Brando did not care about the fate of the lion mane beastmen. He wiped Halangaya's dark blade and sheathed it. He then turned around and asked, "What's the problem?" Carglass sat down beside Brendel and stretched lazily. "My lord, someone is plotting against us from behind." Brendel was surprised by Carglass' words. "Oh." Brendel paused for a moment. "Erwin's group and beastmen came to us one after another. I don't think there's such a coincidence." The young man replied in a low voice, "If Count Audine's trip was due to pressure from the Kurlutzians, then it's hard to guarantee that the Kurlutzians are not behind these fellows from Toquinen." "That's true." Brendel nodded. However, he frowned. Toquinen was a force of the Temple of the Earth. How could Cruz's people get involved with them? If Cruz's people really intended to support Toquinen to suppress Erwin, it would be bad news for Erwin. But would the Holy Cathedral of Fire agree? Even if Cruz had the right to speak in the temple, what they did was against the teachings of the temple, and the temple would not easily compromise. Even if he had to pay a price, it would not be worth it just to target Erwin. He looked at Carglass quizzically. "My lord, you mean to ask, how did Cruz persuade the 2-legged cats of Toquinen to come after us?" Carglass replied. "It's actually very simple. We just have to let those 2-legged cats know that Erwin is no longer a threat." "You mean the news of Erwin's split?" "Yes, my lord. I don't think Erwin's envoys have any way of contacting the outside world. So how did those 2-legged cats learn about Erwin's split?" Carglass replied. "Or is Toquinen's civilization already more advanced than Erwin's?" "Cruz's people." Brando shook his head and replied. "Only Cruz's people or Buga's mages could do such a costly long-distance communication spell. However, Buga's mages had always been the silver folk, and there was no need for them to interfere. Even if those sly white-bearded old men wanted to find a stumbling block for Cruz's people, they would not find a country like Erwin's." However, Brando suddenly realized something and looked at Carglass in surprise. He was able to come to this conclusion because he knew the direction of history and knew more about the relationship between Cruz, Toquinen, and Erwin than anyone else here. He also knew a lot of secret knowledge that was not known to the public. However, this young man from Maxon was able to come to this conclusion with only a few bits of information. His brain was too good. If it was someone else who repeatedly thought about the problem after it happened, they might be able to say that they were meticulous. However, this young man had clearly just defeated the Toquinen lion beast men and already found traces of Cruz's people behind the scenes. Carglass even wondered if this young man had already thought of this when those two-legged cats appeared. Even though Lord Maxon is just an ordinary lord, his son is not an ordinary person. Brendel suddenly felt that it was a wise decision to recruit him. Even though Lord Maxon was just an ordinary lord, his son was not an ordinary person. He looked at Carglass and thought to himself, how could this young man not be famous in history? In the coming era of war and chaos, a young man like him should have made a name for himself very quickly. Could it be that he really died on the way to Vlada? At this thought, Brando could not help but pat Carglass' shoulder and say, "Kid, I saved your life. You should think about how you can repay me." However, he only dared to think about it in his heart. If he did, he would definitely be labeled as a scammer, and the Holy Cathedral of Fire might even send someone to tie him to the stake or something. Brando was about to say something when Carglass said with some doubt, "But the only thing that puzzles me is the motive of those two-legged cats. Did they come all the way here just to steal your sword, my lord?" Although Haurangaya is a weapon that only exists in fantasy and legend, those unlucky bastards are still the ambassadors of Toquinen. Isn't it too degrading for the ambassadors to suddenly turn into bandits? The young man could not help but scratch his head. Or have they had this tradition since ancient times? I don't understand. Count Audine and the female scholar heard the young man's words and could not help but cough heavily. They had a strange expression on their faces. Tradition. If the lion beastmen of Toquinen knew that this young man had turned Toquinen into a nation of bandits, they would not know if they would immediately send an army to kill him. However, Amandina answered Brando's question. She waited until the battle was over before walking up to Brando. The Haurangaya is a sacred relic of the Holy Cathedral of Earth. Its value is no less than that of the Lionheart to Erwin. If the people of Cruz knew that the Scepter of Fire is with you, my lord, they would have come to steal it as well. I see, Carglass said. Then that explains it. It seems that the people of Cruz are behind this. No one should know that the Haurangaya is with my lord, and even if they knew, they would not have the motive to spread the news. Brendel nodded, but at the same time his face darkened. He had thought of this before Carglass did. He knew the background of the Haurangaya very well. However, the people of Cruz were really persistent. They would stab him in the back if they could not do it by force. This was not Veronica's style at all. If Veronica wants to deal with us, she doesn't have to do this. Amandina thought for a while. That commander doesn't have to play tricks. We are no match for her. Maybe she doesn't want to fall out with the Druids? The Druids aren't fools. That's interesting. Carglass suddenly smiled and turned around. Count Audine, it is indeed the envoy of Cruz who is pressuring you, right? As a high-ranking general of the Northern Legion and a noble of the kingdom, Audine did not have to answer the young man's question. But Brendel had fought side by side with him before, and he was dissatisfied with the Kurlut's obvious use of them as cannon fodder. I know the person who came. She is the daughter of the current Prime Minister of the Cruz Empire. So it is indeed Cruz's doing, but Veronica doesn't know about it. Amandina's eyes lit up. Brando nodded, but he was troubled by the fact that they could not confront the commander of the Azure Firmament. If they did, Veronica would take the Empire's prestige into consideration and make the act real. Even if she wanted to punish her subordinates for acting on their own, she would not let Erwin's people off easily. So no matter how you look at it, Cruz's people are not going to let this go. Brando said. He was not happy with the fact that he had to deal with the calamity of wolves while dealing with the schemes behind his back. Don't worry, we can fight back. Carglass lowered his voice and whispered. My lord, Cruz's people are not making a move themselves. They are probably waiting to see our trump cards. Brando was stunned. My lord, Amandina whispered. Carglass means that they should be nearby. Brando immediately reacted, but he did not act immediately. Instead, he quietly signaled to the people around him and quietly threw out a wind spirit spider card. Brando threw the card on the ground. and the translucent spiders appeared from the bushes without attracting anyone's attention. Then he whispered, "Continue, let's see what they plan to do next." Carglass was stunned, but he immediately understood that the young lord had already made his move. The young man smiled as if he wanted to see the world in chaos. "Since they want to see where our bottom line is, they will naturally raise their cards again and again. But as for a stronger force, the Holy Cathedral of Fire," Amandina replied. "Cruz's people have the right to speak in the Holy Cathedral of Fire. If they can use Erwin's envoy to pressure us, then it is impossible that they did not consider the Holy Cathedral of Fire." Audine and the noblewoman's expressions changed when they heard about the Holy Cathedral of Fire. "But the Holy Cathedral of Fire does not completely listen to Cruz's words," Amandina replied with a frown. She was grateful that Brando had saved her life, so she said, "If the priests want to make a move, they need a reason." "A reason?" Brando felt his eyelids twitch slightly. He might have thought of the other party's excuse, heaven's armor. He could not help but take a deep breath. He only hoped that his guess was not true. Otherwise it would be troublesome. Author's note. Second update. I'm looking for a magical item that can speed up a rabbit's digging speed. It only exists in the past and fantasies. You know what it is. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 390. Vahina covered her mouth with both hands as she stared at the Lionman's defeat. She wanted to complain about how useless those bastards outside were. A few hundred of them couldn't even deal with a small group of Erwin's ambassadors, but in the end she didn't make a sound. Brando had truly frightened her. She now knew that the country bumpkin had held back, or she wouldn't have been able to wait for Veronica and the others to arrive. However, Vahina's heart started pounding again. She had seen Brando's cold gaze from afar, not daring to even breathe. Her heart was pounding, and she was suddenly afraid. Elman, Vahina whispered. He won't notice us, right? Don't worry. Elman frowned and comforted her. He won't be able to react that quickly, and even if he guessed, he won't be able to notice us. He frowned as he looked in the direction of the battle. It was not a good sign for Erwin to have such a genius, not to mention one who was younger than him. He looked at Brando with an inexplicable sense of enmity. He patted Vahina's shoulder and said, "Let's go, let's leave." Elman was not confident either. The young man's strength was too terrifying. "Aren't we going to wait for the people from the Holy Cathedral?" Rono took a deep breath and whispered. "The Holy Cathedral won't act as hastily as those beasts. Doha is greedy, but he's not stupid." Elman shook his head, but when he saw Vahina's mouth open, his expression changed and he quickly covered her mouth. "Don't make a sound." "Ugh." Vahina's eyes widened. He's looking over. Elman's movements stiffened. He raised his head and saw Brendel's gaze casually sweeping over in his direction. He immediately felt his scalp go numb. "Impossible, this is a coincidence." "Lower your head, Rono, don't let him see you," Elman shouted in a low voice. But what he didn't know was that a wind spirit spider was silently passing by him. Brando turned around and saw the wind spirit spider behind the three Cruz nobles. When the wind spirit spider stopped, his gaze also stopped. He found out. Vahina struggled in Elman's arms, her face pale with fright. "Don't be rash, Vahina." Brando tilted his head, and half of his face turned a soft gold against the light of the bonfire. He just glanced at the depths of the forest, then shook his head slightly and slowly pulled out Haurangaya. The edge of the black blade reflected a hint of golden light. Seeing this, Viscount Elman finally realized something and his expression changed. "Run." Brando didn't say a word about the panic of Cruz's noble heirs. At this moment, his left hand had completely pulled out Haurangaya. The white whirlwind created by the White Raven sword style immediately gathered on Haurangaya. He then passed the Haurangaya to his right hand, gripped the hilt tightly and pointed forward. His eyes reflected a cold light. In this cold light, the three Kurlet's nobles who were running away were reflected in his cold eyes. Brando pulled back his sword and swung it backward. One strike. It was as fast as lightning. A white sword aura emerged from the blade of the Haurangaya with a sharp howl. The majestic white sword aura instantly spread out from the blade of the Halran Gaia. As though a pair of white wings had spread out, the wings moved forward. A white cyclone separated the air from both sides, and the wind pressure swept through half of the forest in an instant. The trees fell forward layer by layer, and a roar like that of a giant beast's awakening echoed in the night sky. It was the sound of the wind under the night sky. That moment, the adventurers, envoys, mercenaries, and druids who gathered near and far in the forest subconsciously looked up. Veronica was discussing the next plan with her officers, but when she heard the distant sound, her expression changed. She immediately looked up from the map in front of her. The wizard in the silver robe put down the crystal ball in his hand and looked up. He looked in that direction. The roar shook the entire forest. With the black night sky as the background, a huge, indescribable white cyclone swept through the forest in the north. It was like the dorsal fin of an ancient shark that swept through half of the forest. Then it gradually dissipated into the air. White Raven sword style. That's the little guy. What happened over there? Veronica's expression suddenly changed. She turned to her officers and asked sternly, "Where are Vahina, Rono, and Elman?" Delphian, who was sitting at the side, also changed her expression. The daughter of the Prime Minister lost all color in her face. Delphian. Veronica saw the problem at a glance. Did they go over there? The long-haired girl shook her head subconsciously, but when she saw Veronica's stern gaze, she froze and nodded with difficulty. Veronica's expression darkened. She walked up to Delphian and asked, "What do you know?" She nodded again. Asterisk smack. Asterisk a loud slap rang out. Veronica took a deep breath and looked at the long-haired girl who was holding her face as she fell to the ground. "Why didn't you tell me?" Delphian covered her face. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth and dripped down her white wrist. The crimson blood was as dazzling as an agate in the snow. The girl lowered her head and did not say a word. "I'll tell you later." Veronica snorted coldly. She was extremely worried that Brando would kill Elman, Vahina, and Rono. If that happened, Cruz might really start a war with Erwin. Although she threatened Brando with war, she knew that it was not the right time for the Empire to be involved in a war. Especially a war with Erwin. "Line up." Veronica glanced at the others coldly. "Follow me." Brando did have the chance to kill Elman, Vahina, and the black-haired young war alchemist. When he attacked, Audine and the noble female scholar did not even react in time. However, when they saw the three young men running around on the other side of the forest, their expressions changed instantly. Of course they knew who they were. Austin wanted to stop Brando, but it was too late. When he saw the terrifying blade aura coming out from the young lord's blade, he froze. His hands and feet turned cold. It's over. Although Austin was an experienced general, there was only one thought left in his mind. He could not imagine what would happen if Elman, Vahina, and Rono were killed by Brando. War was not a big deal. Erwin would definitely suffer Cruz's wrath. At the same time, the three young men had the same thought. Vahina was so frightened that she sat down on the ground and even forgot to cry. She only stared at the blade aura coming towards her. Elman's mind went blank. He immediately left Vahina behind and pushed Rono away, trying to get him to shield him from the attack. But when he turned around, he bumped into a black pine tree. The black-haired young man was also thrown to the ground. Then the white sword chi brushed past their bodies and brushed past them. Swish! Elman's sword belt, Rono's cloak, and Vahina's shawl were cut in half and fell to the ground. The three young nobles were so shocked that they did not move for a long time. A 10-feet-wide path was cleaved through the forest by Brendel. Wherever the sword wind passed, there was no vegetation left, and the thick tree trunks were directly split in half. Vahina knelt on the ground without moving. She waited for a long time before letting go of her hands covering her eyes. She looked up and saw Erwin slowly walking towards her with a cold expression. Brando raised his sword and slid it across Elman, Rono, and her neck. He did not say a word, but the cold aura of the blade aura caused everyone to shrink back slightly. "You won't be so lucky next time," Brando said. "The next time I see you, your heads won't be on your necks anymore." Elman and the black-haired young alchemist did not say a word. Or perhaps they were completely frightened. As for Vahina, she did not dare to refute this time, only kneeling on the ground and trembling. Brando looked at them. He was not crazy enough to drag Erwin into the war with Cruz. However, he knew that as long as he did not lose his mind, the possibility of that happening was very small. Erwin was currently troubled by both internal and external problems, but the Cruz Empire was not going to have a smooth sailing either. The era of war and chaos was still a few years away. However, letting these people stab him in the back was not in line with his personality. The best way to deal with these spoiled brats was to scare them. Only a threat to their lives could make them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. But Brando's real goal was not to kill them. In fact, he did not want to kill them but to save their lives. He raised his head and looked at the end of the path where the blade aura had swept out. There it was. A black wolf the size of a horse carriage stood there. This huge beast looked as majestic as it was when it was alive, but it did not move. Then it shook, and its whole body was suddenly split into two halves from the middle. With a crash, it turned into a pile of rotten meat soaked in blood and slid to the sides. The stinky internal organs fell to the ground, and a pungent smell filled the air. Character killed Lord Tyr Black Wolf. Received 2300 experience. Brando immediately saw 2 lines of green text appear in his vision, but he was not surprised at all. The young lord placed Halran Gaia on his shoulder with one hand and looked back at the other side of the dark mountain. The night sky was filled with the sound of a wolf howling. Then more wolf howls echoed from the forest near and far. Moving red dots began to appear in the forest. Brando looked in that direction for a while, as if to confirm something, then he turned back to his young subordinates and raised his hand. It's coming. Prepare for battle. P.S. Like the rise of the moon, the first outbreak will last for several long nights. The monthly votes will howl and run wildly under the moon, as if indicating the arrival of a disaster. Therefore, the first disaster of civilization is the monthly votes disaster. Do you believe it? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 391. The black forest stretched as far as the eye could see under the night sky. The howls of the wolves echoed in the forest, echoing from afar. The howls got closer and closer, and the air seemed to be filled with the low growls of the beasts. The black creatures moved through the forest. They would occasionally stop and raise their heads to sniff out the scent of life. Their hard noses were filled with white mist in the cold air. A red light appeared in the darkness, and then specks of scarlet light appeared. The specks of light were densely packed together, like an endless ocean. The youth sucked in a breath of cold air, and the faces of the Aween nobles who did not manage to leave in time changed. Prepare for battle. Count Adin knew that they could not escape in this situation. The general made a prompt decision and ordered his knight subordinates. At this time, the young men under Brando were already in formation. Maintain the formation. Someone shouted. Brando turned around and saw that the leaders of the groups were maintaining the formation. Most of the young men looked pale, but the leaders were doing well. Although they were not calm, they were at least calm. Use the spears first. Coden shouted beside the young men. Quick, pick up the spears. A phalanx of spears appeared in the open space. Level the spears. Level them. Spread out the formation. The shouts of the team leaders rose one after another. The spears were slowly leveled. The sharp edges of the spears reflected the golden light of the bonfire and flashed slightly, as if the tip of the spears had extended forward. The wolves stopped and stopped moving forward. The sea of red dots suddenly calmed down. They want to test us. Coden raised his sword and inspected the formation of the youths before he walked back and said. Brando nodded and threw a red light at Coden. Catch! The old swordsman was shocked and caught the red light. He opened his hand and saw a test tube with a seal on it. It was filled with a blood-red liquid that emitted a fluorescent light. Drink it. What is this? Dragon strength potion, Brando replied. Coden picked up the bottle with his thumb and index finger and shook it. I've used this before. It's only effective the first time, right? You think that crappy stuff made from dragon blood moss that you took is worthy of being called a dragon power potion? It's more like the bull strength potion. Drink it. I'll let you experience the true power of the dragon strength potion. Brando replied disdainfully. The bottle he threw at Coden was made from real dragon blood. The material used was the pseudo-dragon blood he bought from the Green Tower. Although it was not as good as real dragon blood, it was still better than the blood of the five-headed lizard. Brendel used the wyvern's blood to create 100 high-grade potions. Other than the ones he gave to the youths, there were more than enough potions for each of his subordinates. It was a pity that the cards were not affected by external items, and he could not use any items or potions outside of the cards. The five-headed basilisk's blood could be used to concoct even more potions. Randolph planned to use some of them on the White Lion Legion in the future, and some on the subterranean dwellers to appease Tajiv and make it more loyal to him. Coden looked at the dragon blood potion in his hand and doubtfully drank it. However, his expression immediately changed and he stared at Brando in disbelief. This is... Brando smiled and did not answer. He only looked at the front line. His subordinates gripped their spears tightly and nervously got into a defensive formation. Erwin's night group moved forward to the left of the front line, while the Fireclaw lizards moved to the right under Ropar's command. The left wing is ready, the captain of the night reported to Count Audine. Ropar put down his double-ended sword and also entered the front line. My lord. Carglass and the leader of the first group, Janos, turned around at the same time. Brendel looked at the two of them. Janos was a boy with short grayish-blonde hair. He was the leader of the first group and was the son of a cobbler. But now he had the aura of a soldier. Brando pointed to his chest and nodded at them. Janos immediately understood. He took a deep breath and turned around. However, he immediately heard someone say to him in a mocking tone, "Yo, the leathersmith's son also wants to fight alongside us?" Janos turned around and saw a gray-haired young man wearing simple leather armor. He placed one hand on his waist and looked at him with a smile. He was the leader of the fourth group, a member of the manor called Roland. If it were any other time, Janos would definitely retort, but now he was not in the mood. He looked at the approaching monsters and felt the tremors of the earth. He nervously gripped his sword. Roland was rebuffed, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he looked at the tide-like black wolves and sighed softly. He came out to look for excitement, but the current situation seemed to be exciting enough. He raised his hand and said, "Dragon Strength Potion. Drink the Dragon Strength Potion." The group leaders ordered almost at the same time. The high-grade Dragon Strength Potion had been given out long ago, but because it was more effective to take it before the battle, Brando asked the young men to wait until now to take it. Thus, after receiving the order, the youths immediately took out the Dragon Strength Potion and drank it all. Under Coden's, Brendel's, and Orthlis's guidance, they had barely reached the level of Iron ranked after a month. The effects of the Dragon's Strength Potion on them were unimaginable. The youths felt as if they had just drunk a ball of fire, and their faces immediately turned red. Hiss, it's so hot. It's so hot. This feels so strange. It's as if my body is burning. They immediately started to make a fuss. However, most of the young men who started to make a fuss were immediately pulled back by the group leaders. Pay attention to your enemies, idiots. Focus, don't be distracted. The roars of the group leaders once again rose and fell on the battlefield. Behind them, Brando nodded and threw a bottle to Count Audine on the other side. Catch Count Audine. For me. Audine stood on the other side, vigilantly watching the black wolves' every move. He was shocked by Brando's action. In theory, they were still considered enemies. He looked at Brando with some surprise. Brando did not even turn his head. He just put down the Halran Gaia on his shoulder and raised it high in his direction. Count Audine. Count Audine was stunned. Do you still remember on the ancient battlefield, the six dukes' horns sounded, and the swallow-tailed flag fluttered high? Brando asked loudly. The young lord's voice spread far and wide in the night sky. Do you still remember where the longsword pointed? The glorious knight welcomed the enemy with a song, and the enemy was defeated. Brando turned his head and smiled at him. In the name of Erwin, in the name of the merciful lion. The count was stunned for a moment before he suddenly reacted. He pulled out his sword, but before he could speak, he suddenly heard someone shouting behind him. Swear by the sword. It was a chorus of echoes. Audine turned his head in surprise and saw the knight he brought with him pulling out their long swords and facing the endless black wolves in the forest. Brando waved his sword and pointed forward. Therefore, the descendant of the late King Eric Erwin. Brando leveled his long sword. Kill all the enemies. The spears were leveled uniformly, and the tips of the blades were connected into a snow-silver parallel line. In the forest, a howl came from afar. The black wolves finally began to move. The tide of monsters was like a rolling black carpet. Their scarlet eyes moved forward and then fell behind. The ground finally shook. They leaped out of the forest, and what they saw was a long wall formed by the human night. More than a dozen wolves leaped to a higher place nearby. They raised their heads and let out a long howl. The howl was high at first and then it became low. Countless black wolves rushed up from both sides with their howls, like countless torrents rushing towards the humans. Then the black monster collided with the human in white armor. The long spear pierced through one black wolf, two black wolves and several black wolves together. Black blood flowed down the long spear shaft. The huge impact made the spear shaft creak as it couldn't bear the heavy burden. The young men and the knights were forced to step back. Then there was a cracking sound, and the spears were broken. Sword! The young men immediately changed to their long swords. The front line was in chaos for a moment. Brando also put down his sword, and the green light net on his retina was weaving out pieces of numbers that flowed down like a waterfall. It was EXP. Although it was only 1 or 2 points, but in just a moment the total amount of EXP increased by more than 100 or 200. Brando took a breath, and then he took out a bottle of dragon blood potion and drank it. The slippery dragon blood entered his mouth, and he immediately felt as if his body was burning. It was not burning, but there was a dry feeling. And just as this feeling was produced, the green light net on his retina immediately changed and weaved a few lines of small words. Strength plus 25, dexterity plus 10, constitution plus 20. Potential 10%. The advanced dragon strength potion increased his stats by about 20%, but this was because his level was higher. If his subordinates took the potion, the increase would be at least a few 100%. Coden's increase would be even lower, but for an intermediate gold rank, even a few % increase would be very impressive. As for potential, it was actually the potion that did not have any effect directly. The potion would remain in the body and slowly transform it, but most of it would be expelled through the circulatory system. However, if one consumed the potion and immediately consumed the remaining potency in battle, the benefits obtained would be much greater. Therefore, Brando swung his wrist and looked at the endless black wolves in front of him. He thought that it was indeed time to farm some EXP. Oh no, it was time for him to exercise his muscles and bones. Brando looked forward and snapped his fingers. Holy sword, open the way. A pair of huge green transparent wings that almost spanned the entire battlefield opened behind him. P.S. This is the first update of the day. Why would I say that this is the first update of the day? Strange. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 392. To that's Dragon Strength Potion. How can there be so much of it? The black-haired youth who was standing far behind almost bit off his tongue when he saw Brando's youths drinking the potion. Rono, what's wrong? The young lady of the flower domain seemed to have just recovered from her shock. She asked in a low voice, as if any louder voice would attract the attention of the ferocious Erewhon country bumpkin. He treats the dragon strength potion like plain water. Rono said with disappointment. It would be better if he used it on a more talented knight. He said this because he was worried for the people of ancient times. What's so surprising about the dragon strength potion? Elman glanced at his comrade coldly. When he thought Brando was going to kill them, he pushed him away. Although it was an instinctive reaction, the Viscount knew that there was a grudge between them now. Instead of explaining, it was better to make a prompt decision. Although Rono was a genius, he only had the potential for the future. In the dark forest, he had plenty of opportunities to make him lose his future. When Rono heard his words, he turned to look at his comrade. Unlike Elman's indifference, the black-haired youth had contempt written all over his face. Elman's previous actions made him angry and disdainful. What do you know? That's a genuine dragon strength potion. The one you took was trash compared to the one the youths took. If I'm not wrong, the purity of the potion might be genuine dragon blood. The black-haired youth did not hide his disdain. Elman took a deep breath, but he did not show it on his face. He only looked coldly at Brando. All right, it's about time to go back. It'll be too late if we don't leave now, the Viscount said again. It was not easy for him to say that this trip was a mistake. However, this was the proposal of the little princess of the flower leaf territory. Even if there was a problem, he had to take the responsibility. Unlike Rono, he had seen many geniuses, but there was only one successor to Duke Manderhill. He was willing to take the risk to come here just to please this little princess. But Brando's sword had almost destroyed his perfect image. At that time he thought he was going to die. Since he was going to die, then being an alchemy genius and being the daughter of the flower and leaf caller was meaningless. At the moment of life and death, one's own life was still the most realistic. However, he didn't expect that the damned heroine would only give them a warning. Elman took a deep breath with a cold expression. Fortunately, the young lady was too scared to notice anything. Although Rono had a grudge with him, he wasn't the kind of person who liked to gossip. However, Viscount Elman still felt uneasy that his weakness had fallen into someone else's hands. He looked at Rono as if he was looking at a corpse. "Look over there," Vahina yelled. Everyone felt a faint light under the night sky. A pair of huge green transparent wings that almost spanned the entire battlefield opened up. However, those weren't wings made of light. Instead, they were miniature magic arrays. The wind spirit spiders appeared in the air one after another, each holding a golden holy sword. The light wings turned golden in an instant. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Although this wasn't the first time some of them had seen this scene, under the night sky, there were countless sparkling golden holy swords hanging upside down in the sky. Compared to the spectacular display during the day, it was even more fantastical. Count Audine raised his head, almost petrified. The Erewhon nobles behind him were even more shocked. What was this? Was this a spell? Their gazes fell from the huge screen of light in the sky to Brando. Was this a spell from that young man? But wasn't that young noble a gold-ranked swordsman? This wasn't a spell from a magic swordsman. Or was he a spellcaster? Brando didn't care about other people's gazes, or perhaps he was already used to it. He only pursed his lips and pointed Halran Gaia forward. "Lower your heads. Lower your heads. His lordship has begun his attack." The group leaders understood and immediately shouted. On the other hand, the knight on the side was slightly stunned. They subconsciously turned their heads and saw a dazzling light in the sky. The white light was so dazzling that everyone squinted their eyes. Then a beam of light pierced through the sky. The beam of light pierced straight down, like a sharp sword piercing through the body of a black wolf. A single black wolf had the strength of a peaked dark iron, but under the attack of the holy sword, the defense of a peaked dark iron was as weak as a piece of paper. The beam of light first burned through the black wolf's fur, and then turned its innards into ashes. The black wolf was still pouncing forward, but with a poochie, it exploded into a pile of broken cotton in midair, turning into ashes that fluttered and drifted down. Following that, more beams of light rained down. Some of them brushed past the heads of the knights, and the terrifying power caused everyone to shrink back in fear. But the black wolves that were targeted by the beams of light were not so lucky. Almost every time a beam of light flashed, it would take away the lives of 2 or 3 black wolves. Brando commanded the dragoons to sweep across the front of the formation 2 or 3 times. It was as if a golden hand plowed through the tide of black wolves 2 or 3 times. The number of these monsters was reduced by more than half in an instant, and the first wave of attack of the black wolves collapsed instantly. Brando could get 7 or 8 EXP for each black wolf he killed, and this round of attack gave him nearly 300 EXP. As the attack of the black wolves weakened, the young men and the knight suddenly felt the pressure lifted. They immediately heard Brando shouting from behind, "Attack forward!" Austin was shocked. His original intention was to retreat while fighting, so that he could meet up with the main force of Erewhon's envoy group, or at least retreat to the defensive line of the druids behind. "My lord!" he shouted. "Brando Baron Abies," Brando replied. "Mr. Baron," Austin shouted. "We have to retreat. It's not safe in front." Brando smiled and pointed forward with his sword. "Erewhon will never retreat." Austin was stunned. He thought that the young man had lost his mind. Although they had a large number of silver-ranked warriors under their command, in the face of the endless tide of wolves, they were just a stone in the sea. "My lord!" At this time Dolent ran up from behind. Although he looked down on Brando at first, at least the latter had helped them teach those arrogant Toquinen beasts a lesson. This made him feel a little better about Brando. But Brando's decision was too shocking. There were only 20 or 30 of them. If Brando insisted on moving forward, they would have no choice but to follow Brando. Seeing the black wolves swarming out of the forest like a tidal wave, Dolent felt the ground trembling beneath his feet. It wasn't a good feeling at all. This wide and fat fellow endured the pain in his scalp and loudly advised, "Sir Baron, please calm down. If we go any further, we will all be torn to pieces." But Brando shook his head. "Count Dolent, you are wrong. We won't." He pointed to the right. "Look, our reinforcements are here." Dolent was startled. He quickly looked in that direction. In that direction, a small group of black wolves had bypassed their camp and tried to outflank them. But at this moment, they seemed to have been attacked head-on and were fleeing in panic. There was a flash of light in the forest. It was a silver spear that reflected the light of the torches. The earth shook as a group of snow-white centaurs charged out of the forest. They wore silver armor, carried spears on their backs, and held bows that humans had never seen before. They chased after the black wolves and shot them down. Every arrow. A black wolf rolled on the ground and stopped breathing. Many of the centaurs had druids in cloaks of grass on their backs. The druids raised their wooden staffs, and huge vines ran along their sides. Green tentacles rose from the ground and lifted the bodies of the black wolves high into the air. Then they threw the bodies of the black wolves into the fleeing pack. Many of the black wolves were smashed into the ground. They struggled to get up, but the centaurs caught up with them and killed them with a single shot. There were at least a few hundred centaurs. When they charged at the edge of the forest, they were like a group of heavy cavalry. They cut into the flanks of the black wolves with a heavy rumble, and the situation of the battle changed in an instant. The centaurs continued to charge forward. They cut into the area between the black wolves and Brando, blocking the front of Brando's group. Then, a centaur that looked older than the rest broke away from the group. This centaur wore armor that was different from everyone else. It had a pair of horns that curved backwards on its shoulders, and an exquisite breastplate that fit its skin perfectly. The metal outlined its muscles. It held a spear in its hand and shouted in front of Brando, "Human, I am Wade. We have heard of the Druid Elder's suggestion. We will protect you from the first wave of the calamity of wolves." The Erewhon nobles were shocked. They immediately turned around to look at Brando. They didn't know what kind of agreement this noble had reached with the druids. "You agree?" Brando asked. "What about the tree sprites?" "I am here, young man." The light on Wade's back distorted, revealing a tall elf with a head full of green hair. He wore a leaf headdress and a cloak, and his upper body was bare. He carried a longbow on his back that was much larger than the ones used by the centaurs. It made people wonder how the elf could use a bow. But when the elf appeared, Amandina, who was behind Brando, was shocked. "It's you." This elf was the one that she and Scarlet met in the afternoon. The elf smiled and nodded. "If it was another human, I might have rejected the Druid Elder's suggestion. But I have a good impression of you, young man. Perhaps I can try to believe your words." Brando was also surprised. Why does this elf seem to know me? But when he saw Amandina's reaction, he guessed something and nodded. "There's no time for small talk. Let me explain the plan first." To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 393. The calamity of wolves surrounded the entire loop of trade winds, and the wolves that had entered the Green Tower were only the vanguard. Brando recalled that there were at least 12 packs of wolves in the first wave of attacks. He did not know if Greyclaw, Bloodfang, Whitemane, or Frostback were the ones in front of the Wall of Roses, but he was certain that there were at least 2 medium-sized packs. This was the weakest part of the first wave of attacks, but it was not to be underestimated. A pack of wolves led by a male wolf could reach the size of tens of thousands, and a mature black wolf was close to the peak of iron rank. Most of the druids in the Witherwood Council were not even at this level. Not to mention, in terms of numbers, humans could not be compared to these monsters. The only advantage that the druids had was that the monsters within the range of their fire seed would be greatly weakened. Brando remembered that when the Black Wolves attacked the Green Tower in the game, the large and stable fire seed suppressed them by 15 levels. However, the Wall of Roses only had a small and unstable fire seed, which was much weaker than the one in the Green Tower. Furthermore, Brando had to break through the blockade of the wolves and enter the loop of trade winds. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be. In comparison, Brando's plan was not that complicated. There was a gap of about 10 hours between the first wave of attacks and the second wave of attacks. Therefore, as long as they could break through the blockade of the first wave of attacks, they would be able to enter the loop of trade winds before the second wave arrived. The only problem was how to break through the blockade within the limited time. And this was where Brando needed the Druid's help. When Elder Widd led his subordinates to Brando's position in the south, the Druids had already launched an attack on the Wall of Roses. It was as if a long horn had sounded in the forest in the middle of the night. Countless birds flapped their wings in the dark, attracting the attention of countless people. It was as if a sleeping dragon had raised its head and let out a long cry that signaled its awakening. The sound was clear and melodious, and it shook the entire forest. In that direction, under the call of the horn, over 1,000 druids and tree elves surged out of the forest. These forest allies draped in cloaks of vegetation seemed to form a green defensive line, instantly blocking off the left flank of the Black Wolf pack that was surging like a tide in that direction. Then, hundreds of deadwood guards awakened from the dark forest under the druid's summons. These ancient trees that were a few stories tall stepped into the pack of wolves and lowered their bodies. Their huge palms could send the calf-sized black wolves flying with a single sweep. As soon as the 100 deadwood guardians entered the fray, the attacks of the black wolves came to a halt. Even the peak iron rank wolves could not withstand a single blow from the wrath of nature. Summoning the Deadwood Guard was a level 4 spell. Although the low-level Deadwood Guard was only a temporary existence, it still had the strength of a mid-silver. Although it was not comparable to the real ancient Treants, it was more than enough to deal with these black wolves. However, only the elites of the Druid Council could summon Deadwood Guardians. These elite druids had no intention of returning to the Green Tower alive. It was evident that the Druid Council had put in a lot of effort to support Brando's plan. However, the Deadwood Guardians were only meat shields, while the Tree Elf archers were killers. Tree Elves were natural-born archers. Most legends mention this, but there was a difference between seeing it with one's own eyes and hearing it with one's own eyes. In the human world, a trained archer could only shoot 10 to 12 arrows per minute. Even with the aid of magic, it was difficult to reach 15 arrows per minute. However, in the society of the Tree Elves, even the most mediocre soldier could shoot at least 25 arrows per minute. Moreover, they used stronger longbows. Hundreds of Tree Elves could create a terrifying storm of arrows. Moreover, in order to deal with monsters in the forest, the elves used ironwood hunting arrows or conical arrows. These arrows were simply a disaster for monsters with low defense like black wolves. After 2 volleys of arrows, the left wing of the black wolves began to collapse, leaving behind a large number of corpses. However, the heavy blow to the left wing immediately attracted the attention of the alpha wolves in the pack. These alpha wolves whimpered to control their own pack, while loudly calling out to inform the alpha wolves further away. Male wolves. For a moment, the howls of the wolves echoed throughout the battlefield. After a long whimper, the overlord hiding in the deepest part of the wolf pack finally raised its huge head. The druid's sudden attack had disrupted the attack of the wolf tide. The king of the wolf pack finally realized this and raised its head. It howled to the sky. A clear howl that was different from all the other wolf howls resounded throughout the battlefield. Looking down from the sky, the majestic wolf tide immediately began to turn under the leadership of hundreds of alpha wolves. They were originally going to cut into the Wall of Roses, but now they were like a huge spiral that began to slowly rotate. The situation of the battlefield changed. But while the druids attracted the attention of the alpha wolves, Brando was not idle. He immediately commanded the centaurs, tree elves, and his subordinates to kill a bloody path from the side of the wolf tide. He was followed by Erwin's envoys because Count Audine saw that persuading the so-called Lord of Abes was ineffective. He had no choice but to follow. Could not be helped. There were only 20 to 30 guards in their group. It was almost impossible for them to retreat back into the Wall of Roses defensive line. and it seemed that the centaurs and tree elves were not willing to escort them back. They realized that their title as Erwin's envoys was not enough to deter these barbarians. But what made them feel a little better was that at least Cruz's people did not get any benefits. But the tree elves and centaurs treated Brando with great respect. In fact, this was a euphemism because the centaur elder Wide and the tree elven leader, Quinn, only had a short discussion before they handed over the command to Brando. Count Doland had wanted to go to the front of the group to ask Brando to send them back, but he was scared by a black wolf halfway and quickly retreated to the middle of the group. From then on, he did not say a word about this proposal. And at the front of the group, Brando's troubles were no less than the nobles. The centaur elder Wide led hundreds of centaurs to clear a path through the waves of black wolves. At first the pressure was not great. According to Brando, the black wolves were nothing in front of the centaur elder. But as they approached the thorn ridge on the east side of the Wall of Roses, the situation gradually changed. "Look over there." Brando heard a squeaking voice behind him. He didn't need to look back to know that she was the daughter of the flower and leaf caller from the Kurlutz Empire. At least the 3 Kurlutz youths weren't stupid enough to follow them. Although it was a little awkward, at least they could save their lives. Brando looked in the direction Vahina was pointing and raised his eyebrows. He thought that the young lady was making a fuss over nothing, but he did not expect to see something worth paying attention to. He saw a dense pack of black wolves in the north. A few giant wolves were clearly taller than the other black wolves around them. They were charging towards them with their pack. Lord tier black wolves. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. Brando counted 6 black wolves from the nearest direction, and there were 5 more in the distance. The appearance of 11 mini-bosses made his heart sink. It was not strange for alpha wolves to appear in a pack, but it was unusual for so many of them to appear at the same time. Brando immediately looked around to see if there were any traces of a male wolf. Logically speaking, the appearance of so many boss black wolves in the vicinity must have been ordered by the male wolf. But he did not hear the male wolf's howl that was different from the other black wolves. Did he make a mistake? Or was the male wolf nearby? But when he looked around, he did not find the male wolf's unique figure. Brendel knew that his perceptive sense had reached 25 ounces, and even if it was night time, there should not be any blind spots within a few hundred meters with the help of the dim light. But to be safe, he still looked around carefully. There was indeed nothing. But Brando was not at ease. He immediately shouted towards the group of centaur elders, "Elder Wade!" The centaur elder was currently piercing the head of a black wolf with his spear. He immediately turned around and looked at Brando with a questioning gaze. "Do you see that?" Brando pointed towards the direction of the black wolves and said loudly, "Those black wolf lord tier black wolves are on your left." The centaur elder immediately nodded. Although it was his first time experiencing the wolf's calamity, as the highest commander of the centaur elders, he had plenty of battle experience. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Tell your men to back off," Brando ordered. He wanted to see the black wolf lord tier black wolf's reaction. It would be best if he could capture the position of the male wolf when it gave the order. Although Wade was puzzled by Brando's sudden order, the centaur elder did not say anything. He immediately blew a whistle, and the hundreds of centaurs immediately changed their formation and moved closer to Brando's side. The young men under Brando couldn't help but sigh when they saw this scene. It was their first time on the battlefield, but they were still greatly shocked by the tree elves and centaurs that only existed in legends. At the same time, the lord who could give orders to the tree elves and centaurs was even more unfathomable. "Those big guys are called Black Wolf Lord tier Black Wolves? What a strange name." Brando immediately heard the young lady behind him ask curiously, "What does that mean? Is it the same as the human Lord tier Black Wolves?" "Hey, I'm asking you too. Erwin people." She couldn't help but shout when she didn't get a response from Brando. Brando turned back to look at the young miss in annoyance. Although he didn't say anything, the words "Am I that close to you, young miss?" were written all over his face. Seeing Brando's expression, Vahina managed to hold her breath. Who would dare to treat her like that when she was in the Empire? However, this young lady's sharp eyebrows were raised all the way to her forehead. She widened her eyes in shock, but in the end, she did not dare to point at Brando and say a single word. "TSK, forget it if you don't want to say it." In the end, the young lady grumbled in a low voice, Of course, her voice was so soft that she was afraid that Brando would hear her. Author's note. Originally, I wanted to have a few more days of outburst, but in the end, I got stuck in the plot yesterday. Luckily, I was able to break through the bottleneck after one day of outburst. It seems that talking about outbursts without a draft is a little unreliable. From tomorrow onwards, I will continue to prepare the draft. Let's see if I can give you guys a surprise in a few days. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 394. Brando could not be bothered with the spoiled noble's daughter. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the pack of wolves. As soon as Wae's centaur guards retreated, the black wolves became restless. In just a few moments the beasts had surrounded them. The 11 black wolves were like sharks swimming in a black tide. Brando could see that they were driving their own kind forward, intending to surround them. Brando did not hold back. At first, he had summoned the wind spirit spiders to hide in the forest to avoid attracting too much attention. But at this moment, he waved his hand and more than 200 golden light spots immediately rose from the forest like bombers. They soared into the sky and dived towards the black wolves. Every time they swooped down, a golden beam of light would appear. Brando did not hold back this time. He directly launched a round of attacks. More than 100 beams of light flickered in the night sky. Every time they flickered, a few black wolves would turn into ashes. He looked expressionlessly at the number of experience points flowing down like a waterfall. It looked spectacular, but in reality there was not much experience points. It was just that the source of experience points was a little shocking on the battlefield. The golden beams of light were at their densest, almost weaving into a large net. Under Brando's command, the net of light slowly extended backwards. Any black wolf that passed through the net of light would immediately be set ablaze and turned into a dazzling ball of fire. For a moment, the fire within the pack of wolves rose and fell one after another, forming a dazzling field of white light. The black wolves that were set ablaze continued to move forward, but after a few steps, they would turn into a ball of burning tar. Countless black wolves repeated this process, and finally, the net of light flickered slightly and then disappeared. The whole process lasted only a blink of an eye. In the next moment, Wydd and his centaurs stopped at the same time. These centaurs had seen the most tragic battles in the Black Forest. They had even fought against dragons before. But this time they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. From where they stood, the net of light extended for nearly 100 feet. The pack of black wolves that had been as dense as the tide had all disappeared, leaving behind only an empty expanse of charred ashes. In less than a breath's time, hundreds and thousands of black wolves were annihilated. Even the black wolves in the distance were frightened by this terrifying attack and became hesitant to move forward. 5250 experience points. Brando remained unmoved. He once again paid 2 Earth EP to replenish the Holy Sword Technique's consumption. The wind spirit spider glowed brightly in the air, as though it was waiting for the Black Wolf Lords to make their next move. However, the Black Wolf continued to linger. "Let's hurry and advance." Brando heard Wade ordering his subordinates from afar. Indeed, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But that was not what Brando wanted to achieve. He raised his head and looked past the black waves. Beyond the limits of his vision, he saw the foggy areas on the battlefield. Beside him, Quinn, the leader of the Tree Elves, also looked in that direction. "There's an alpha," Quinn said. Brando nodded. The wolf pack's reaction proved that. He didn't use Holy Sword Technique to open up a path through the tide of black wolves. That was Elder Wydd's mission, but to see how the wolves would react. But the black wolves' reaction was quite reasonable. But Brando knew that the real monsters were not like this. Monsters were creatures that were distorted by magic, especially low-level monsters like the black wolves. They were violent and lacked intelligence. They would never retreat when attacked. Instead of looking at them as individuals, it was better to look at them as a whole. An injured black wolf would only become more violent. But they retreated. This meant that the black wolves were intentionally avoiding harm. Only the alpha of the wolf pack, the male wolf, could do this. Because the male wolf had the intelligence of an adult human, it could consciously order the wolves to reduce their losses. But this reasonable reaction exposed the existence of the king of the wolf pack. After a short while, a long howl suddenly sounded in the misty battlefield. This howl was different from the usual black wolves. It was loud and mournful, as if it was announcing something. It knows that we've found it. Quinn's expression changed. He took out his longbow and whispered. The black wolves began to move. Brando nodded again. The beast was very cunning. Probably guessed his intention. It was a little creepy. Especially when you knew that a beast had the same intelligence as you, and was plotting to rip out your throat. You couldn't help but have a feeling of goosebumps on your back. At least Brando saw Carglass, who was always fearless, change his expression. How can a beast be so smart? The young noble from the Maxon region could not help but ask. The tree elves put up a finger and made a shushing gesture. Shua. That's a male wolf. Don't question its authority. Be careful, it might slit your throat in your sleep. The tree elves whispered. This time it was not only Carglass. The strange tone made Genos and Roland shiver. Brando saw this scene and did not find it funny at all. This was a male wolf. In the Black Forest there had always been a legend. Every 100 years when the two moons shone together, the year of the tidal cycle, the young wolves that were born under the red moonlight would eat their siblings and parents. They would then grow into giant wolves that were stronger, more outstanding, more cunning, and more ferocious than ordinary wolves. Male wolves. Another legend mentioned that the male wolf was the mate of Ekis, the wolf's calamity. They would mate in the summer, and their offspring would walk like humans. They were the scourge of the dark forest that had existed for thousands of years, the night shadow. No matter which legend it was, it portrayed the cunning and ferocity of the male wolf. And it was the truth. Brando looked at the misty battlefield. His gaze seemed to penetrate the fog. Amandina, he said. Yes. Amandina took a deep breath and turned around. Her face was a little pale. Amandina was very nervous. She could barely hear her own heartbeat due to the low growls around her. She was surrounded by an endless tide of black wolves. It was as if she was a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea that could capsize at any time. In fact, everyone was the same. The young people did not look too good either. Moreover, the air was filled with a pungent burnt smell. Amandina, who came from Bragg's, could not help but feel nauseous when she thought about where the smell came from. But she resisted the urge to vomit. She pulled her skirt with one hand to prevent it from getting dirty. She walked up to Brando and asked, My lord, is there anything I can help you with? I remember that the potions I made are with you, right? Yes. Give me the gray one. Amandina immediately opened a small leather pouch at her waist. Brando looked at the various potions neatly arranged and carefully sorted. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. At least he could not do this. Even if he was a level 130 warrior, Brando was still used to putting all the potions together randomly. It was as if taking them out would give him a surprise. But most of the time, taking out the wrong potion in the game could be fatal. Especially when you were on the verge of death and wanted to find a bottle of number 7 holy water, only to find a bottle of ketchup after searching for a long time. You know how embarrassing that is. But this bad habit had been with him for many years. Brando did not want to change it, but he found that at least he had an assistant who could help him change this habit. Amandina took out the third test tube from the left. The whole process took less than a second, and the potion was handed to Brando. Amandina. Brando took the potion and could not help but call out. Yes. Amandina was slightly surprised. Compared to Tia, he replied, unplugging the cork from the test tube. You and Pharaoh are more like sisters. But who is the elder and who is the younger? Amandina glared at him, but did not forget to close the pouch carefully. Brendel raised his head and looked at the battlefield. The fog seemed to have thickened, and there seemed to be an endless number of beasts with blood-red eyes surging out from the fog. They were closing in again, and the situation on the battlefield was changing. Could it be that this pack of wolves is the Mist Howler? Brando knew that every male wolf had a unique name and had a unique ability. Legend has it that the howling male wolf could travel through the fog and take away the lives of travelers who had lost their way in the white fog. He frowned. Nature-type male wolves were the most difficult to deal with. In comparison, he was more willing to deal with physical-type wolves. For example, Bloodclaw and Frostbite were much easier to deal with. What a pity. Brando cursed under his breath. The cunning of the Misthowler male wolves was beyond his expectations. He did not expect that the druids would not be able to attract the attention of two Misthowler male wolves at the same time. It was difficult for his party to deal with just one Misthowler male wolf. It was a Misthowler male wolf. It was a monster that had awakened its element power. The fog was getting thicker, and Brando was not the only one who noticed it. The youth stopped talking as the strange changes in their surroundings made them nervous. Erwin's party had also gotten closer, and Brando could see the knights in green armor approaching them through the fog. He raised his head and drank the murky gray liquid in the test tube. It was an eagle's eye potion that could increase perception and vision by 20 ounces for an hour. The ingredients were giant eagle feather and magic fern. These two ingredients were as expensive as cabbages in the Green Tower, but the potion itself was very useful, so Brando had made a lot of it. Brando drank the potion and immediately felt his vision become clear. It was as if the fog had become transparent. He turned his head and saw a shadow the size of a mountain in the north. "Fuck!" Brando cursed under his breath. That was fast. He immediately raised his hand and signaled everyone, especially the centaur elders in front of him, to slow down. There was no point in speeding up now. If they did not kill the Misthowler male wolf, none of them would have a chance. The surroundings became eerily quiet. Then an abrupt scream broke the brief silence. It was the scream of a human before they died. P.S. Second update. Rumor. It is said that a certain king of traps has resumed publication, haha. Chapter 395. Everyone turned around and saw the knights chasing after the two silver-gray wolves, but they were too slow. The nobleman who was attacked only managed to let out a short scream before his throat was pierced by the sharp white teeth. His scream came to an abrupt end as the two wolves dragged the human's corpse into the white fog. "How did they get here?" Count Audine roared. "How did you let them in? Are you all idiots?" A cripple. A direct descendant of the Misthowler. Brendel watched as the nobleman kicked his feet and disappeared into the mist. His eyelids twitched slightly. "It really is that guy." He immediately waved his hand and shouted, "Everyone stay close. Those bastards are invisible in the fog." As soon as his voice trailed off, two streams of fog passed by the young man not far away. "Be careful." Quinn raised his longbow and shot 3 arrows in that direction. 3 arrows, 2 from the front and 1 from the back, were like 3 silver lines in an instant. 2 blossoms of blood bloomed in the white fog. However, one of the arrows still missed its mark. The silver-gray wolf leaped to the side and pounced on a young man not far away. The monster's movements were shockingly fast. Before anyone could react, it had already bitten the young man's shoulder. With a scream, the wolf tore off half of the young man's body. The young man, who was covered in blood, widened his eyes as if he could not believe that he was dead. "Quincy!" The young man's companions immediately roared in anger. Seeing their companion die in front of them, they were instantly blinded by anger. They unsheathed their long swords and rushed forward to avenge their companion. But Brando was faster than them. Although he had expected that there would be casualties, it was impossible for him not to be enraged when he saw the young man he had personally groomed die in front of him. Brando immediately pointed in that direction. 10 beams of light pierced through the fog and punched a few holes in the body of the cripple. At the same time, with a thought, the net of light immediately formed an airtight net around everyone, forcing the invisible demons to stay far away. However, the knight and the centaur elders who were further away were not so lucky. Although the limpers were only silver-tier creatures, as long as they did not attack, they would not show themselves in the mist. That was why they were able to take advantage of the situation. What's more, once the demonic wolves launched an attack, there would be many of them working together. Even if they were slightly stronger than the demonic wolves, they would still suffer a great loss. More than half of the knights were killed in an instant, and the centaur elders also lost more than 10 men. Most of the people who were attacked were dragged to the ground, and then 2 or more limps pounced on them and dragged them into the fog in the blink of an eye. For a moment, shrill screams rose and fell one after another. The entire group seemed to have turned into a slaughterhouse in an instant. Looking around, one could see wild beasts fighting over human corpses that had been torn apart. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. An intact soldier was dragged into a pack of wolves, and in the blink of an eye, Only a pile of white bones was left. Amandina was so frightened that she held her breath, but she still stood by Brando's side. Even if her face was pale, the hand that was holding onto her leather pouch could not help but tremble slightly. Vahina, who was not far away, had lost all color in her beautiful face when compared to the calm noble's daughter. Fortunately, the black-haired alchemist still showed some of his true colors as a descendant of a Kurlutz noble. He used a few strange plants between himself and the flowing fog to protect the three of them. Even though Viscount Elman's expression was a little ugly, he still pulled out his longsword and stood beside Vahina to protect her. Occasionally he would force back the silver-gray demonic wolves that wanted to pounce on them. The three of them finally managed to hold their ground. When they looked up, they saw that the fog was getting thicker and thicker. It was obvious that the attack of the limpers was just the beginning. For a moment, everyone could not help but feel a little hopeless. Except for Brando. He commanded the dragoons to protect the flanks of the youth's formation while diverting his attention to the battlefield. Finally, after a short moment, he caught sight of the male wolf's presence again. It ran to the center of the battlefield. Brando furrowed his brows. Falarntia Windwall! The young lord shouted as he held Howran Gaia in one hand. He knew that there would be more and more limpers on the battlefield. Even if they were not a threat to him, they were a fatal threat to the youths under him. He brought them to experience the battlefield, not to send them to their deaths. When the two wild elf sisters heard Brando shout, they immediately took a step back and went to the center of the formation. After attaining Vientiane, the mercenaries of Lopez had the strength of a peak silver rank. For a peak silver rank elementalist, casting a second circle wind wall was too easy. The two wild elf sisters worked together to cast a spell, and it only took them an instant to create a whirlwind around their fingertips. Wind, spread your wings. Falarn raised her hand and shouted. The whirlwind around her fingertips seemed to have expanded 1,000 times in an instant. It was as if a tornado had appeared out of thin air and swept across everyone. Then it stabilized around everyone and formed a roaring wall of wind with a radius of more than 100 meters around them. The second circle wind wall was a powerful weapon used to counter physical arrows. It was not very useful on normal days, but it was a powerful weapon against the howling fog. When the wind blew, the fog around them immediately dissipated. Everyone saw the air ripple like water. Then, within the range of the storm, dozens of silver-gray demonic wolves appeared at the same time. These demonic wolves were slightly startled. They obviously didn't know what was going on. However, Brando did not have the obligation to explain to these uninvited guests. He pointed his finger and dozens of light pillars immediately turned them into ashes. Good idea. Quinn put down his longbow and could not help but exclaim in admiration. He had lived for more than 200 years. It was not that he had never heard of the howling fog, but Brando's ingenious idea made him feel ashamed of his own inferiority. When the wind blew and the fog dissipated, the limping walkers had lost their most prided weapon. The limping walkers that had revealed themselves were just magical creatures that were stronger than the average black wolf. The centaurs could easily drive them out of the circle of wind. However, Brando knew that defense was only a temporary measure. If they wanted to break out of the fog, they had to solve the problem once and for all. Mr. Coden, I'll leave the command to you for now, he ordered. Carglass, you'll be second in command. My second in command? Carglass was shocked. If he took over the position of second in command, he would have to face an endless sea of wolves and this strange attack. Would he be able to do his best? He could not guarantee that. But if he did not even dare to face a few wolves, wouldn't his previous ambitions be a joke? The young man pursed his lips and nodded firmly. No problem. Brendel gave him a thumbs up, but Coden looked at him and asked, What are you trying to do? The old swordsman was much calmer. Of course I'm going to kill the alpha wolf, Brando replied. Scarlet, come behind me. The red-haired girl was using her short bow to kill the surrounding wolves. When she heard Brando's words, she turned around and swept her messy hair back with her left hand. She then immediately threw the short bow to a young man beside her. She took out the lightning spear from her back and silently walked to Brando's side. You won't be afraid if you follow me later, right? Brando asked. It's not the first time anyway. Scarlet looked at him with her amber eyes and replied, Mr. Quinn, can you do it? No problem. The leader of the tree elves replied casually. Brando nodded. He wanted to bring Ropar along, but Ropar was a strength-based warrior and was not suitable for the battle below. He took a deep breath and raised Haurangaya in front of him, but at that moment Brando felt a hand grabbing his hand. He turned around and saw Amandina frowning. She gritted her teeth and looked at him. My lord, you forgot what you promised me. You're already a lord with responsibilities. Why are you risking your life again? Brando paused for a moment, but he still let go of Amandina's hand. This is a battle, not a matter of personal heroism. Don't worry, I'm confident. Amandina opened her mouth, but she gritted her teeth and swallowed the rest of her words. I understand. She lowered her head and replied with gritted teeth. Brando did not know what she knew, but he was not lying. If they stayed here for too long, the wolves would have the time to surround them. Then all of them would die without a grave. But the wolves were cunning and would not let them succeed so easily. If it was anyone else, they would have to fight to the death in this situation. But Brendel knew that if he had a chance to strike, he would be able to do it. Because this was him. Because this body had the memories of another person's soul. But how do you plan to get past them? Coden asked. Outside the circle of wind, the wolves are like a tide. It's not easy to kill our way out, so how are we going to approach the wolves? Do you want the centaurs to open a path? Quinn asked. No need. Brando shook his head. He held his sword in his right hand and thrust it forward with his left hand. Everyone listen to my orders. Split up. The entire battlefield fell into silence. Elder Wie turned his head to look at Brando. He was slightly startled, but he knew that he could not disobey an order from the army. He was full of doubts, but he raised his halberd up high. Author's note. I've already told you the reason yesterday, but there will definitely be 2 chapters. You can just come and refresh at around 8 every day. Also, I'm looking for a proofreader. There are typos, you know. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 396. Count Audine pierced his sword through the throat of a silver-gray limping monster that was pouncing on him. He then threw the monster's body far away. He did not bother to see if the monster would be eaten by its companions when it fell into the wolf tide outside. Just like the rumor said. Count Dolent grabbed him by the shoulder and yelled, Look over there. They've gone crazy. Austin was stunned. He turned around in confusion, but what he saw was this scene. The centaur commander raised his halberd high in the air. He raised his front hooves and stood in the middle of the battlefield, as he turned to his subordinates and roared out with all his might. Formation, split up. His voice was like a clap of thunder. The silver centaur elders were stunned for a moment, and then there was a ripple in their formation. The crescent formation seemed to split into 2 in an instant. At the same time, the leader of the tree elves, Quinn, raised his longbow and shouted to the tree elves, Thorisar. Dark green cloaks of vegetation spread out to both sides, revealing the path in the middle. Carglass, who was standing at the back, did not say a word. He only raised his hand to the right, and the group leaders immediately separated them. In the next moment, Brando saw a smooth path in front of him. However, when the centaurs and the tree elves retreated, the black wolves on the periphery immediately rushed in like a torrent. The earth rumbled. Audine was shocked. He did not understand why the young man would do this. Was he not seeking his own death? Or was he trying to encircle Brendel? But the black wolves outside were endless. It seemed that letting a few of them in would not help the situation. Instead, it would only add to the situation. They've gone mad. Dolent shouted from behind. They want to die, and they want to drag us down with them? Audine did not answer. He just looked at the battlefield. Suddenly, the noble soldier had a premonition that things were not as simple as they seemed. Because things were not as simple as they seemed, the black wolves formed a torrent that crossed the path between the centaurs and the tree elves. They were almost charging towards the youth who was behind them. The male wolf that commanded them clearly knew that this youth was the highest commander of this group. It wanted to kill Brando in one fell swoop. But Brando had the same idea. Are you ready? Brando stared at the black torrent and asked. Yes, Chin, she replied. Quinn withdrew his longbow and nodded. The young lord retracted his left hand and gripped Halrangaya with both hands, then pointed at the black torrent that was sweeping towards him. 10 meters. The black wolves in the front row had already lowered their bodies and were ready to pounce. They bared their snow-white teeth and growled from the depths of their throats. Brando could almost see the undisguised madness and thirst for slaughter in those blood-red eyes. He exhaled. He raised his sword. Explosive power, head-on breakthrough, buff from the spirit crystal. Next was the White Raven sword art. A terrifying tornado burst out from the sword, and the wind that shot up to the sky was as sharp as knives. Coden, Carglass, and Amandina immediately retreated. The black wolves were even worse off. They were already prepared to attack, but they had no choice but to retreat. Even so, the wind pressure still pulled them off the ground and threw them far away. Then, Brando raised the tornado and slashed downwards. This was the same sword he had used to kill the Toquinen lion beast man. But he did not use the White Raven sword style at that time. Thus, he did not receive the buff from the 17+2 ranks of the military sword style. Thus, this attack could be said to be the combination of all the power that Brando had mastered over the past year. The huge wind pressure caused Halrangaya to shine and emit a dazzling white light. Everyone could not help but squint their eyes and stare with their mouths wide open at this terrifying attack. No, they should be looking at the tornado in Brando's hand that was gradually tilting, bit by bit, towards the ground. A flash of light. Everyone closed their eyes. Then they could barely see the wind blades exploding in all directions. The black wolves that were at the front of the tornado were directly torn to pieces, and those that were further away were at least pulled up into the air. Their fur and bones were separated, and a rain of blood sprayed in the air. The wind pressure pushed forward, and the black tide that was rushing in was swept away by the sword like a reverse river. The wind blades swept across 100 meters in an instant, decapitating all the black wolves within range. The aftershock continued to move forward, and the black wolves within a few hundred meters were swept away. The shockwave even spread across half of the battlefield. Even the misty howler in the middle of the battlefield felt a chill run down its spine. It instinctively raised its head, wanting to see what kind of danger was causing it to feel uneasy. But it immediately saw the most shocking scene in its life. After Brando's sword slashed down, a sword scar that was almost a few meters wide was formed in front of him. He was almost completely exhausted at this moment. If it was an ordinary person, his strength and dexterity would have been reduced to less than half at this time. But Brando saw a green light flashing in front of his eyes, and immediately weaved a message. Unyielding talent activated, strength and dexterity continued to be at their peak. Brando's body shook a little, and it took him almost 3 to 4 seconds to recover his breath. But he could not help but secretly complain in his heart after this sword slash. Because he had used all his strength, he still felt as if his hands did not exist. Even after a few seconds they were still sore. But when he opened his eyes, he already saw that there was an unobstructed passage between him and the male wolf that was hiding in the pack. The only problem was that the passage had shrunk by half in a moment. The black wolves did not seem to care how many of their kind died under the sword slash just now. They immediately began to fill the empty space that Brando's sword had created. Hurry up! Austin took a deep breath. This count finally understood what Brando and the others were going to do. But in his opinion, this attack did not seem to be successful. Because almost in the few seconds that Brando recovered his breath, the wolves had occupied the passage again. Too slow. Austin could not help but sigh secretly. But Brando's attack was not over yet. He took a breath, then raised his left hand and roared, "Earth, give me a blade!" Although he had used all his strength, the sound was still inaudible. But the effect caused by it made the male wolf that was watching this scene from afar almost turn around and run away. With a loud bang, the ground in front of Brando broke. The floor collapsed to the middle, and the two sides rose up high, the width of dozens of meters. The black wolves that had just rushed into this area could not dodge in time and were all pulled to the center by the huge force. Although they reacted in a moment and tried to escape to the sides, the power of nature was not something that a few monsters could resist. Only a series of continuous sounds could be heard. The ground sank down layer by layer, and countless black wolves were buried in the soil. The broken ground stretched forward until it was less than 10 meters in front of the misty howler. But before this cunning male wolf could react, Brando had already clenched his 5 open fingers. A rock tooth that was more than 20 meters tall suddenly protruded from the deep ground in front of Brando, and then a second, a third, and countless sharp teeth protruded out in succession. It was as if a man-made bridge was built between Brando and the male wolf in a moment. The whole process seemed to have gone through a long time, but in fact it was only a flash. The misty howler was stunned for a moment before it realized what the human was going to do. It looked up at the towering bridge that protruded from the whole battlefield, and could not help but be slightly stunned. It then reacted and wanted to avoid it, but unfortunately it was in this short period of time. It had already lost the chance to escape. Brando finally regained his breath after the Howran Gaia unleashed its power. He immediately shouted, "Come close to me." Quinn and Scarlet immediately reacted and approached him from the left and right. The weight of the two people was no pressure for Brando's current strength. He grabbed the two of them and instantly activated charge. With 900-ounce agility, a black line extended forward on the rock-tooth bridge. The black line undulated up and down, and in the blink of an eye, it traversed a distance of hundreds of meters. Then Brando and the other two stopped in the air. They had appeared above the misty howler. The misty howler raised its head and looked at the tiny human that appeared in its blood-red vision. At the same time, Brando, Quinn, and Scarlet also saw the giant wolf that was covered in gray fur. It was almost the same size as the five-headed snake, lizard that they killed half a month ago. It only had one eye. Legend has it that the misty howler lost one of its eyes in a battle with a male wolf called Unicorn. The game designers recreated the scene very realistically, just like the giant wolf that appeared in front of Brando now. But Brando did not have much time to admire this terrifying monster. They had to end the battle quickly, before the other black wolves reacted and before the rock bridge collapsed. In other words, they had less than a minute to solve the problem. "Scarlet, restrain it," Brando shouted. "Mr. Quinn, cover me." As he said this, he was already like a meteor falling towards the male wolf. The misty howler howled. It did not like to participate in battles, but if there were humans who challenged its authority, it would not mind tearing their bodies apart. It looked at Brando's slow figure and swung its paw at him. Of course, Brando knew that his attack would not work. The male wolf was an elemental awakened monster and was at least 7 times more agile than him. He was probably not much faster than a snail in the eyes of the misty howler. When he saw the misty howler's shoulder move, he knew that it was going to reach him first, but he had already expected this. He stretched out his right hand and activated the ring of the Wind Empress on his index finger. A wind bullet was shot out. Although the seemingly sharp airflow was no different from a gentle breeze to the male wolf, the recoil from the airflow was enough to push Brando back, barely dodging the wolf's claws. But when the male wolf's attack failed, it immediately pounced on Brando again. The two actions of grabbing and pouncing were completed in the instant Brando landed on the ground. It was so fast that only a blurry white shadow could be seen. Brando was in midair, and the ring of the Wind Empress was still on cooldown, so he could not dodge. It seemed that he was about to die in the wolf's mouth. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 397. The misty howler's fur stood on end as it pounced forward. Its huge body covered half of the sky, and it was as if time itself had stopped. Brando smelled the stench of blood and knew that he was close to the beast's fangs. The next moment, his head would be separated from his body. If he was an ordinary gold-ranked warrior, he would be in grave danger. However, Brando was also an elementalist. He turned around in the air and shouted, "Wind shackles release." A wind dance technique was cast on his body. This wind spell was a cantrip that any elementalist could learn when they started their apprenticeship. Its effect was to slow down the fall. It was an adventurous spell in the game, and was not designed to be used in battle. However, the creativity of the players was limitless. Ever since the first elementalist called Death Zone used this spell in actual combat to change the flight path and avoid attacks, this spell had become one of the most popular low-level spells in PvP. This was because Wind Dance was just a cantrip. As long as ones will reach 20 ounces, they could cast this spell without any spells. Although Brando was not an elementalist in the past, he had seen this technique in countless videos. The misty howler calculated the speed of his fall and pounced forward. However, Brando spread his wings and suddenly slowed down in the air. The male wolf roared angrily and brushed past him. Brando rode on countless azure feathers and turned in the air. He pulled the misty howler's silver mane and leaped forward with the beast. It looked like Brando was riding on the back of the male wolf, but it was not so leisurely. The misty howler's reaction was very fast. It immediately noticed that Brando was on its back after its attack failed. Therefore, as soon as its front feet touched the ground, its huge body swept one after another. It actually changed its direction. However, Brando's reaction was not slow either. The male wolf tried to throw Brando off its back, but Brando stabbed his sword near the wolf's spine. The Haurangaya pierced into the wolf's spine as if it was a layer of rotten leather. An arrow of blood spurted out from the back of the male wolf. Brando could not help but sigh. He had never thought of fighting a monster over level 60, elemental activation, with the strength of a level 40, lower gold. Even if he had the ability at that time, the weapon in his hand would not have been able to penetrate the opponent's defense. Ordinary level 30 to 40 weapons could not even pierce through the tough outer skin of elemental level monsters. Even if it was the same fantasy weapon, it could only break through the defense. However, the additional sharpness and hardness of Haurangaya made it a powerful weapon against monsters of a higher level. With this sword strike, the outcome would be decided. The misty howl let out a shrill cry, but strangely, its blood turned into mist as soon as it came into contact with the air. Brando quickly held his breath. The blood of monsters was not a good thing, and most of them were highly toxic to humans. However, he immediately let go of the mane and jumped down to the side. An inexperienced warrior might have remained on the back of the mist howler and attacked, but how could a monster with elemental activation be easy to deal with? There was no such thing as a blind spot. Sure enough, as soon as Brando jumped, white gas rose from the mist howler's body and condensed into 4 whips. The whips swept across the male wolf's back one after another. If Brando was still on the back of the male wolf, he would have been smashed to pieces. The male wolf controlled the whips and immediately realized that the enemy had changed positions. The cunning of the human surprised it. At least 3 times it thought that it had a chance to kill the human in one fell swoop, but each time the human dodged at the last moment. If it was the first or second time, it could be said to be a coincidence, but if it was the third time, then it could not be said to be a coincidence. The male wolf's IQ was very high, and it immediately jumped back to distance itself from Brendel. The man and beast's dazzling exchange of blows only lasted for 2 to 3 seconds before both of them landed on the ground at the same time, and the battle finally came to an end. The people in the distance did not see what happened, and only Quinn and Scarlet understood what had happened. Scarlet was still fine as she didn't know how terrifying a male wolf was, but Quinn's expression changed. As a tree elf who lived in the forest all year round, he knew how powerful the male wolf was. But such a terrifying creature was taken advantage of by the young human in the first round of attacks. Brando's use of skills was simply amazing. It was as if he knew how the mist howler would attack, and was always able to predict the enemy's moves. Brando indeed knew what the mist howler was going to do next. Although every male wolf had a unique name, it was only a legend. In fact, the mist howler was a common name for this type of male wolf. A male wolf that mastered the elemental activation of mist. Brando had fought with this type of big guy before, and was very familiar with their habits. It was as if the big guy was about to bare its fangs and attack as soon as it landed. It lowered its body and prepared to pounce. Brando also landed on the ground, but he had to regain his balance and could not catch up with the opponent's movements. There was a difference of several tenths of a second. This was a difference of several times the dexterity on the battlefield. Brando immediately activated Tree's toughness, and a layer of horny skin grew all over his body. The black skin looked terrifying. He now had close to 250 MP, which could be converted into 5 points of innate armor. In addition to the 2 points of Crimson Blessing and the 5 points of Fire Shield, he had a total of 12 points. Brando intended to take the attack head-on. That's more than enough. The most dangerous part of the distance is when the 3 of us jump down from the bridge. The reason why I attacked first is to attract the Howling Fog's attention. I know that I'm the only one who has the confidence to evade the Howling Fog's attack in midair. If it was anyone else, they would be beheaded. And he had indeed done it. Brando stabilized himself and raised Haurangaya with both hands, ready to take the attack head-on. 10 seconds. As long as this attack succeeded, the outcome of the battle would be decided. But the Misthowler male did not pounce, because 2 green shadows descended from the sky and blocked its path. If it was an arrow from a normal person, the beast would have ignored it, but this arrow was different. Brando almost screamed when he saw the arrow. The arrow of life was the bane of all monsters. It was said that this was a holy item from the goddess of the forest, and had the power to destroy darkness and chaos. Of course, this was an exaggeration, but it was true that the arrow of life could temporarily suppress a monster's elemental power. In other words, if the arrow hit the Misthowler male wolf, it would turn into a normal monster at the pinnacle of gold. If the arrow hit, the Misthowler male wolf would not be hit by the arrow. The monsters in the forest and the goddess of the forest were old enemies and knew each other's methods. The moment the green arrow was released, the Misthowler male wolf instinctively felt threatened and retreated. It avoided Quinn's arrow, but also gave up on attacking Brando. Another 3 seconds passed. It was only then that Scarlet's first attack arrived. As soon as the red-haired girl landed on the ground, she stretched out her left hand towards the Misty Howler. 7th lightning cord. She knew that the Misty Howler was powerful, so she used her most powerful skill right away. 5 bolts of lightning shot out from her fingertips. This time, it was much stronger than the one she used against the tree herders in Chablis. The bolts of lightning coiled around her body and shot towards the Misthowler male wolf like a lightning dragon. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The lightning dragon pierced through the Misthowler male wolf's body. Arcs of electricity crackled and formed a dazzling white ball of electricity under the night sky. But what surprised her was that the lightning seemed to have hit a cloud of mist. The Misthowler male wolf's body suddenly dispersed like a real white mist in the air. Scarlet didn't think that she could kill this terrifying creature with an elemental awakening in one blow. She immediately turned around vigilantly, just in time to see the monster reassembling its body from a cloud of mist behind her. A pair of blood-red eyes stared at her. Scarlet almost held her breath. The Misthowler male wolf raised its claws. "Quinn!" Brando immediately shouted. The Misthowler male wolf was only 60 meters away from him. It was too late for him to attack. Even though Scarlet had the recovery ability of an oracle, she would be bedridden for at least 10 days to half a month after being hit by the Misthowler male wolf. Scarlet had learned her lesson from her previous battle with Ekman. Quinn raised his bow and shot 2 more life arrows. The green light forced the Misthowler male wolf to retreat again. The monster roared angrily. It was starting to get impatient after its repeated attacks had failed. It let out a low growl from its throat, ordering the surrounding Black Wolf lords and their pack to attack. This was the 15th second, but Brando had already expected this. This was the reason why he brought Quinn along. But the young lord had changed his mind. He originally wanted Quinn to suppress the surrounding Black Wolf lords while Scarlet attacked. But now that the tree elf leader had the life arrows, things were different. "Scarlet, deal with the surrounding monsters," Brando shouted in a hurry. "Quinn, shoot the silver line on the Misthowler male wolf's forehead. That's where its magic converges." Monsters were formed by magic power, and the point where their magic power converged was similar to the vital points of ordinary creatures. Quinn was slightly startled. He squinted his eyes and saw a faint silver line on the Misthowler male wolf's forehead. The tree elf leader hesitated for a moment before raising his bow. 2 life arrows appeared on the bowstring. At the same time, a circle of lightning struck the surrounding black wolves that were trying to surround them, tearing their skin and flesh apart. Their burnt fur emitted a nauseating burnt smell. Brando circled to the side of the Misthowler male wolf. But the Misthowler male wolf also turned around. It felt threatened by Quinn's arrows and knew that he was aiming at its weak point. This feeling made it feel uneasy. Uneasiness accompanied by anxiety. Author's note: I'm going to faint. I was supposed to release it at 8 p.m. Luckily, someone came to ask me. I'm in tears again. Chapter 398. Anxiety was often accompanied by anxiety. After the Misty Howler realized that it was unable to shake off Brando despite changing its attack pattern twice, the human seemed to know what it was thinking and would always appear in the path of the Misty Howler. Finally, the Misty Howler could no longer hold back and pounced on Quinn with its mouth full of white teeth. This was the 20th second. But Brando would not let it go. He raised Halrangaya and clashed with the Misty Howler's fangs twice, producing an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing against metal. The immense force forced Brando back, and his hands felt as if they were about to break and fly out of his body. When the Misty Howler parried the Misty Howler's fangs for the second time, the Halrangaya was bent back by almost 90 degrees. What the F***ck? This power is too ridiculous. Brando frowned. If not for the stability of Halrangaya, he would have been dead by now. But it was not much better. The Misty Howler finally lost its patience and leaped back to avoid Brendel's attack. Instead, it pounced on Brendel. It also realized that it would not be able to attack Quinn without killing the human first. Once the Misty Howler changed its target, Brando knew that his good days were over. With the 20-level suppression, he could not even see the Misty Howler's movements clearly. He instinctively blocked the attack with his right hand and felt a sharp pain in his body. Then he was sent flying. The fire shield that surrounded his body suddenly shattered, and the defense provided by the tree tenacity was also penetrated in an instant. Fortunately, the Crimson Red Blessing was a fantasy-grade equipment, otherwise it would have ended up like his first pair of gloves. Brando was sent flying nearly 20 meters into a pack of Misty Howlers and even landed beside a Misty Howler. He was dizzy from the fall, but fortunately, he remembered that he was still on the battlefield. He quickly shook his head and sat up. But just as he sat up, he squinted his eyes and scanned his surroundings. His vision was dark red from the blood dripping from his forehead. Then, he saw a Misty Howler the size of a horse carriage staring at him. Holy***T. In a daze, Brando was not scared half to death by the pair of blood-red eyes. The Black Wolf seemed to be stunned by this alien as well, but it was obviously much faster than Brando. It was only stunned for a moment before it bit down on Brando's shoulder without hesitation. There was a cracking sound. "Sir Lord!" Scarlet, who was in the distance, screamed in fright. She had just finished off a pack of black wolves and their leader, and when she turned around, she saw Brando being sent flying and killed by the wolves. At that moment, she felt as if the world was falling apart, and she almost blacked out. However, Brando would not die so easily. The red-haired girl immediately saw that although the black wolf had almost swallowed half of Brando's body, a bloody arm rose from between the black wolf's jaws and grabbed half of the monster's head. "A good dog doesn't block the way, understand?" Brando's voice came from the wolf's mouth, and then the hand twisted hard. The crisp sound of bone breaking was heard. The black wolf leader's spine was broken by such a casual twist, and it fell down in a strange posture, revealing Brando, who was sitting on the ground, covered in blood. Brando squinted one of his eyes, and his left eye and face were bleeding. The young lord's expression did not change, but when the black wolf bit half of his shoulder, he almost died from the pain. Brando was really unlucky this time. He did not expect to fall beside a black wolf leader, but when he was sent flying by the Misty Howl, his HP had already dropped below the limit. At that time, his innate ability had already activated and saved his life. As for the black wolf leader's attack, it was just an additional pain. Other than that, it did not affect him at all. But Brando did not have time to lament how bad his luck was. He immediately looked up at the direction of the Misty Howl. In his blood-red vision, he saw the Misty Howl retreating. In fact, Quinn had already readied himself to shoot the moment the youth was sent flying. 25 seconds. Quinn aimed for a moment, released the bowstring, and 2 arrows left the bowstring. But even though he had experienced hundreds of battles at this moment, the tree elf leader did not dare to believe that his arrows would be effective. The male wolf's reaction was too fast. In an instant, the 2 arrows pierced through the fog like 2 straight green lines and pierced the Misty Howl's forehead. At this time, the male wolf had just sent Brando flying and was preparing to deal with the tree branch on the rock bridge. But what it saw were 2 green lights. "It hit!" Quinn shouted in his heart. The life arrow hit the center of the male wolf's forehead, but what made the tree elf leader's expression change was that the male wolf actually turned into mist again, allowing the 2 life arrows to pass through its body and nailed into the ground beside its feet. His wings were still shaking slightly. The attack was ineffective? Quinn could not believe his eyes. He was using the arrow of life that was blessed by the goddess of the forest, Naya. The arrow of life was the bane of all demons. Logically speaking, it should be able to repel all elemental powers. But how did the male wolf manage to dodge it? Quinn did not understand, but that did not mean that Brando did not know. In fact, the Misty Howl was not feeling as good as he thought. In order to avoid the fatal arrow, it had used its life-saving skill. Brando remembered that the skill was called World Projection of Fog. When the Misty Howl used this skill, its body no longer existed in this world, and it was immune to all physical and magical attacks. Even holy words and magical spells could not affect it. But it was a pity that it could only use this skill once a day. In the game, once the male wolf used this skill, it would go all out. Brando remembered the berserk state very clearly, and he had been waiting for this moment. As expected, after the Misty Howl paused for a moment, its body suddenly lit up with eye-catching blood-red patterns. This was Mana Burst, a skill that every high-level monster knew. It was similar to the berserker's berserk state, but it did not have any side effects other than consuming a large amount of mana. This was the ultimate skill of the monsters, and they would not use it unless they were in a desperate situation. Once Mana Burst was used, the monster's strength would increase by about 10%, which was about 5 levels. The current Misty Howl was close to level 70 elemental mutation. At this moment, not only Brando, but even Scarlet could feel the terrifying power of the Misty Howl. Quinn, who was in front of the Misty Howl, paled. Then he saw the Misty Howl open its mouth, and a faint red light appeared in the depths of its throat. The leader of the tree elves instinctively wanted to dodge, but the moment he moved, he realized that the white fog around him was as heavy as a mountain, and he could not move. Then a ray of red light hit Quinn's chest. The tree elf's longbow fell to the ground and he immediately let out a scream. Misty Curse, Life Evaporation. This was a single target, but its power was so terrifying that any player who participated in the first Calamity of Wolves mission would tremble in fear. Once again, it appeared in front of Brando. Life Evaporation was one of the most terrifying spells in the early stages of the game. Yes, it was a spell, not a skill. It was a type of witchcraft and also the first instant death spell. Its effect was to evaporate all the liquid in a person's body. For most creatures, this was the gate to heaven that led them straight to death. Heh! But at this moment, Brando could not help but smile proudly. He had been waiting for this moment. Brando raised his left hand, and a blue card appeared in his hand, Energy Drain. Sense. Life Evaporation, Ring of Thunder, Life Ward is within the range of my senses. Ring of Lightning is obviously Scarlet's skill, but this Blessing of Life should be Quinn's spell. Brendel was slightly taken aback. But the creature hit by the fog curse would not be able to move or cast a spell. It seemed that this spell was provided by his equipment. To be able to resist the effect of a level 7 fog curse, the tree elf leader's equipment was not bad. There were all kinds of strange spells provided by equipment, so it was normal that Brando had not heard of them before. But he immediately put down the card in his hand and replied, Target Curse, Life Evaporation. Seized. The green light on his retina changed. At this moment, the fog howler suddenly let out a furious roar because it found that it could not control its own spell. Brando pointed his finger at the fog howler from afar, and the red light spat out by the fog howler made a turn in the air. At that moment, almost everyone on the battlefield saw this scene. They saw the long red light circle in the air and hit the fog howler. A mournful cry was heard. The spell was the first to take effect. Red mist gushed out from the male wolf's body. The giant wolf trembled under the immense pain and fell to the ground. In an instant, the red mist surrounding its body spread to dozens of feet. Hold your breath. Brando covered his bleeding eye with one hand and immediately shouted. He knew that the blood was evaporated and should not be touched. When the fog howler fell to the ground, the spell was immediately interrupted because the guide had lost consciousness. But the spell's interruption did not mean that the disaster was over. The forceful interruption of the spell caused the magic to backfire and take over the tattered corpse. Followed by a loud noise, the male wolf that fell on the ground suddenly exploded from the inside, turning into a pile of white rotten meat. Even so, the flowing magic still flowed through the broken organs, and the large and small explosions lasted for a few seconds before stopping. Brendel finally relaxed when he saw this tragic scene. The young lord sat on the ground covered in blood and let out a long sigh of relief, but he could not move his eyes away from Brendel's sight. Brando was stunned as he looked at the pile of flesh that represented the fog howler's corpse. Looking at the black spindle-shaped feldspar, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. No way, the heart of Ekis the Calamity? To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 400. Mist lingered in the mountains. After the battle, there was a strange tranquility in the forest. Hundreds of centaurs were scattered in the forest, taking a short rest after the battle. Not far away, the young men from Erewhon were almost all injured, and the tree elves were not much better. After killing thousands of wolves to open a bloody path, everyone felt a kind of exhaustion from the depths of their bones. This kind of exhaustion was like a pair of dying claws grabbing at your nerves, dragging you into the abyss of drowsiness. But even if their eyelids were fighting, no one dared not to be alert. Brendel sat on a withered tree that had fallen to the ground. He did not know which era the tree was from, but the hollow trunk was covered with layers of moss, and there was even a bunch of mushrooms growing under it. He held his injured cheek with one hand, and even though it was painful, he gritted his teeth and allowed Maria to cast a healing prayer on him. Fortunately, the healing spell was as powerful as in the game. Brando felt a slight itch on his wound, but it quickly healed and the pain disappeared. But the excessive blood loss still caused the fatigue. The healing spell could accelerate the metabolism, but it could not produce energy out of thin air. After casting the last spell, Muriel took out a small piece of dry food from her bag and handed it to him. "Eat something, Mr. Baron. It will make you feel better." Her voice was a little soft, but it was very pleasant to hear. "Have you been on the battlefield?" Brando asked. "As a cleric, I participated in the night's operation." Muriel replied with her head lowered. "Cleaning up bandits?" Muriel nodded. "Have you seen a dead person?" "Yes." "No wonder." Brando secretly sighed that he had picked up a treasure. An experienced cleric who did not have a position in the temple was very rare among the NPCs. It was just that Muriel did not seem to have any sense of belonging to the group. He vaguely felt that this trainee cleric was knowledgeable, and most knowledgeable people had their own opinions, and it was much harder to fool them than the average person. But did this knowledge come from books? Or did it come from personal experience? Brando asked, "Do you like that guy?" Just as he finished speaking, he heard a series of coughs coming from behind him. Brando didn't need to turn around to know who it was. But Muriel also blushed. She lowered her head and did not answer. Brando smiled. "Although you didn't answer, I already have an answer." As long as he had Carglass in his grasp, he wouldn't have to worry about the priestess staying behind. At the same time, he also confirmed Maria's gender. Amandina sat beside Brando and couldn't help but chuckle. Brando's thoughts couldn't escape her mind, but she couldn't help but laugh at his blunt question. "Since Sir Lord isn't good at these things, why don't you just let me do it?" The noble lady couldn't help but think. "My lord, when do we depart?" Carglass noticed the strange atmosphere, and Maria's blushing face made him a little uncomfortable. He coughed and hurriedly stepped forward to interrupt. "Depart?" Brando was a little amused. He put down his hand, and there was a light white scar on his left cheek. The color was different from the rest of his skin. "What's the hurry?" When the black wolf lord bit him, its fangs were like daggers that cut across his cheek, leaving a long wound. The wound extended from his forehead to his cheek. Fortunately, it was blocked by the frontal bone, or else according to Maria, he would have lost his left eye. Brando was scolded by Amandina because of this, but she knew that Brando had no choice but to let it go. "Ahem," Carglass coughed again. He knew Brando's plan. "Of course I'm in a hurry. Didn't my lord say that we only have a few hours left?" Even though they had only known each other for less than a month, Carglass had gradually become familiar with his lord's personality. To be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that he liked to criticize Erewhon, Brando would have been the best follower in his mind. "That's true," Brando replied. "But there's no need to hurry. Everyone needs to rest." He raised his eyes and looked at Carglass. "Are you feeling guilty?" Carglass coughed heavily and decided not to answer. Brendel smiled and took out a pitch-black, spindle-shaped stone from his backpack. The previous battle could be considered tragic. He had lost 4 of his youths, and it was the first time they had suffered such a loss since they entered the dark forest. Other than those who died, there were also some who were seriously injured. It could be said that 10% of the youths that Brando personally trained had lost their ability to fight on the battlefield, and this was even under the protection of the centaurs and tree elves. However, he was satisfied that the death of their companions did not defeat the youths. Although it was inevitable that their morale was low, at least they did not despair or break down. This meant that they were already qualified warriors. Brando believed that the youths under his command would become excellent seedlings after more training and tempering. Although they might not be as good as the players of the past, they would at least be able to step into the current era. Under his guidance as a player, some of these youths might be injured or die, but no matter what, they would become the first batch of beneficiaries of the Great Demonic Wave. This was a treatment that only the brightest geniuses in history could enjoy. Thinking of this, he could not help but subconsciously turn around. The injured centaurs were resting in the forest. They had suffered the most losses in this battle. According to the centaur elder Wrd, at least a third of the centaurs had left the battle. Most of them were dragged into the dark wolf tide and torn to pieces. Of course, the tree elves and druids had also suffered some losses, but it was not as bad as the centaurs. Now, he only had about 400 centaur elder guards left. They were intermediate silver-ranked warriors. Then there were more than 200 tree elf archers. To be honest, as a lower silver-ranked ranged unit, Brando was reluctant to send the tree elf army into a war of attrition. He imagined for a long time what would happen if he sent the tree elves to Tanajal's battlefield. But it was a pity that most of these tree elves were destined to fall in this forest tonight. Lastly, there were the dozens of youths under his command, and the dozen or so silver-ranked knight in Erwin's diplomatic party. However, it was unlikely that Count Audine would give him command of the knight, so Brando automatically ignored them. He glanced at the nobles. Audine and Dolent were fine in the previous battle, but the noble female scholar had died on the battlefield. Brando could not help but sigh. He had saved the female scholar's life because she was Scholar Anthony. Unfortunately, he could only save her once, but in the end he could not save her a second time. This made him sigh. Although the casualties were heavy, the result was still glorious. In the eyes of almost everyone except for Brando, killing a male wolf was already an impossible task. The ability that the male wolf displayed at the end showed its rank. Elemental activation. Those who were slightly knowledgeable understood what it meant. Brando, Quinier, and Scarlet were only lower gold ranked, but they were able to kill it. Of course, the main credit for this was Brando. Everyone saw the last scene. Brando's attack that changed the direction of the Misty Howler's spell confirmed his identity as a master of curses and swords. In addition to the male wolf, there were more than 3 black wolf lords and countless black wolves that died under Brando's sword at the beginning of the battle. The wolf tide within a radius of 1,000 square meters was swept twice in a row. Brando did not notice it at the time, but after the battle, he was shocked by the increase in experience points. Other than the 35,000 experience points from killing the Misty Howler, the experience points from killing the Black Wolves and Black Wolf Lords was as high as 23,250. That one attack gave him almost 60,000 experience points, and after that, he gained almost 12,000 experience points from fighting in party mode, or army mode. This battle alone gave Brando more than 70,000 experience points. Brando calculated this number, which meant that they had killed at least 10,000 black wolves. The only regret was that the number of black wolves was too large, and the drops from the Black Wolf Lords were all wasted. Thinking of this, Brando looked at the cold stone shuttle in his hand. Fortunately, he had obtained this item. Just this one item alone was worth the price of the ticket. What is this? Scarlet, who was sitting at the side and leaning on the lightning spear, looked at Brando holding the item in his hand without saying a word. She held back her curiosity, but she was not as good as Amandina. She finally could not help but reveal her small canine teeth and ask. Brando looked up and smiled mysteriously. "You mean this? This is something good." "My lord, don't keep me in suspense." Carglass could not help but roll his eyes. "Hurry up and tell me, I want to know what this is too. It looks like it's worth a lot of money." Worth a lot of money. This time it was Brando's turn to roll his eyes. "Young man, you should know that this item is a divine item that cannot be bought, even if you have money. Countless guilds would go crazy for it. You should know that it is not as simple as just money. But in other words, it is unlikely that Kargleis knows what money is. He replied. This is Hattie's Heart of Calamity. Ekis' Heart of Calamity? The alpha wolf Ekis? Amandina asked. Something like that. But this is not Ekis' heart. It is a rare magic item. Legend has it that it seals the soul of a male wolf and imprisons the violent mana and chaos. Mana and chaos? Kargleis asked in confusion. Brando nodded and looked at the long stone shuttle in his hand. This thing is the source and core of the male wolf's power. Or rather, it is a male wolf. The one who owns this stone shuttle is the alpha wolf. What does it do? Kargleis asked again. You will see soon. Brando answered. The Heart of Calamity was a talisman, but its usage was different from ordinary talismans. As for how to use it, he raised his hand and placed the stone shuttle flat on his forehead. Everyone watched as the stone shuttle in his hand suddenly vibrated and emitted a red light. Then it softened and strangely melted into Brando's forehead. The stone shuttle went deeper and deeper into his skin. The red light seeped into his skin and spread out like a pattern. Then it formed a circle of abstract thorn-like patterns on his forehead. Then the red light slowly faded, and the color of the patterns gradually turned gray. The whole process lasted for more than 10 minutes before it finally subsided. Brando raised his head. The stone shuttle had turned dark red, and under the circle of patterns, it displayed a strange beauty. That grayish-white scar extended from his forehead to his cheek, diluting the bewitching aura once again. The combination of the two made everyone unable to take their eyes off him for a moment. So, Brando raised his head and answered, It's considered done. Huh. Everyone was stunned. Amandina was even more stunned. She looked at Brando's strange appearance and was speechless for a moment. As soon as Brando's voice fell, he saw a green web of light weave a series of information on his retina. It seemed to be made up of countless words. The green dots then reformed into words. Nest Lord system found, neural connection. Connection complete. Willpower passed. Obtained alpha wolf status. The green light flashed, and Brando immediately sensed many familiar auras in the surrounding forest. The furthest one was still a few miles away, and it was the scattered wolves that they had shaken off. With a thought, he immediately sent out a message to one of them. In a moment, the tyrannical aura began to move towards their direction. Peak silver rank, agility is at least 100 ounces. Its movement speed is very fast, and it will reach this place in a few minutes. It's a mature black wolf lord. Brando immediately concluded. Everyone looked at him, but he did not say a word. Not far away, Quinn suddenly stood up from the bushes and looked at the side of the forest vigilantly. He immediately signaled to the others. The black wolf has caught up. Everyone's expression changed, and they immediately looked at Brando. This young lord had previously promised that he had shaken off the black wolf. But Brando's expression did not change, and he only looked in that direction. A moment later, accompanied by a loud crash, a huge black wolf lord leaped out from the bushes and landed heavily on the ground. Its body was almost the size of a carriage, and when it landed, the ground shook slightly, but it did not immediately attack. Instead, it raised its head and looked at Brando with its blood-red eyes. Scarlet, who was beside Brando, immediately drew her spear and wanted to stop it. The tree elf leader, Quinn, also raised his bow and aimed at the black wolf lord. If Brando did not raise his hand to signal them to stop, he would have done so. Then he raised his head and looked into the black wolf lord's eyes. The latter hesitated for a moment, and finally slowly approached. But it did not take any offensive actions, and instead stopped not far from Brando. Then it used its huge head to sniff Brando. Then it intimately rubbed against him. At that moment everyone was stunned. Kargleis was the first to react. This is the function of this thing. If he did not see it with his own eyes, he would not have believed it. Brando reached out his hand and touched the black wolf lord's furry nose. He then turned around and smiled proudly. Why do you think there's a problem? No, that's not it. Kargleis' eyes suddenly lit up. My lord, how many wolves can you control? Brando thought for a moment. The system recognizes me as a small wolf pack, and I can only control 2 lords and 200 black wolves. But this thing has growth potential, so it's called a divine artifact. The system? Carglass was stunned. Ahem, it's just a name. Only then did Brendel realize that he seemed to have gotten a little carried away, but it was not his fault. Hattie's Heart of Calamity was really too demonic. In the early stages of the game, as long as one player had it, it was simply a power that could sweep through everything. However, it was unlikely for one player to obtain it. Most of the time, it was owned by the large guilds. This was because it would attract too much attention if one player had it. After all, it was a guaranteed drop in the game when a character died. Moreover, it was embedded in the forehead, attracting attention. He remembered that the first Ekis's Heart of Calamity was also dropped during the Wolf Tide. Could it be a drop from the Howling Mist? Brendel's heart skipped a beat. Could it really be possible? Did this mean that this thing was a fixed drop? He could not help but scratch his head. At first, he thought that he had been infected by Falerne, and that his bad luck in the game had finally been broken. But now it seemed that it was not the case. But if the Howling Mist was a fixed drop, then it meant that the other male wolves were the same. Or perhaps this was the setting of the monster tide. Brando could not help but recall the good things that had been dropped during the Wolf Tide. Other than Ekis's Heart of Calamity, there seemed to be a Claw of Awakening and a talisman of the fanged mythical beast. Brando was a little tempted, but he knew very well that he did not have the ability to reap more benefits from the Wolf Tide. If he was a step late, he might even end up in the belly of the wolves. Therefore, he could only resist the urge to pry into the legendary equipment. One must be content with what one has. Brando comforted himself. After all, it was already a surprise that he had obtained Ekis's Heart of Calamity. The Heart of Calamity, the Claw of Awakening, the talisman of the talisman of the talisman of the fanged mythical beast was the best one. And more importantly, he was the only player here, so there would not be any player guilds that would come looking for trouble with him. Moreover, the so-called drop upon death was not a punishing attribute to him, was it? Brando was very pleased. Ekis's Heart of Calamity was something that he did not even dare to think about in the game. In fact, he had never paid attention to it. At most, he only knew of its name. He had struck it rich this time. P.S. My body is a little better today. I wanted to rest for a day, but I felt more energetic tonight. So I tried to write a chapter and it ended up being 5,000 words. Let's post it together. I'll stop at 5,000 words for today. I'll resume my normal update tomorrow. Also, I've been browsing the forums for the past 2 days. In short, I've seen some very funny news. The National Development and Reform Commission has shown its might again, and America has lost its virginity to Afghanistan. The Maid Nation is acting cute, and Little White Rabbit is secretly attacking. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 401. Brando lowered his hand from the Black Wolf Overlord's head. In order to form a new wolf pack, it was necessary to subdue the alpha wolf and gather the normal wolves. The Black Wolf Overlord could be subdued through the pressure of the wolf pack leader, but the normal wolves had to be reproduced through the Nest Overlord's ability. In a Black Wolf pack, the male wolf was the core of the Nest Overlord. It guided the gathering of mana to form the Black Wolf, a shadow creature. Now that Brando had inherited the title of the wolf pack leader, he could naturally use Ekis Heart of Disaster to display this ability. He switched windows in his vision, and the light green screen switched page by page. Finally, he found the new skill in the newly opened Lair Lord panel. Nest Overlord Black Wolf consume 50 points of MP to create a Black Wolf. Nest Overlord Shadow Rock Beast consume 20 points of MP to create a Shadow Rock Beast. Brando was stunned when he saw the two skills. Summoning the Black Wolf was easy, but what was the Shadow Rock Beast? Could it be that Ekis Heart of Disaster could provide 2 types of Black Wolves for the player to choose from? To be honest, Brando didn't know much about this thing. He only knew that it could summon Black Wolves, but this was his first time experimenting with it. He tried to recall, but he didn't remember there being a Shadow Rock Beast among the Black Wolves. Moreover, since it was the Heart of Disaster of the Foghowl, even if it provided additional variants, it should be the Limpwalker, right? From the MP consumption, the Shadow Rock Beast should be much weaker than the Black Wolves. This was something he couldn't figure out. but since he couldn't figure it out, he might as well give it a try. Although Brando had consumed a lot of spirit MP to summon the wind spirit spiders, he had recovered most of it. Summoning a few black wolves wouldn't be a problem. He didn't waste any time. He raised Haurangaya and pointed it at an empty patch of grass not far away. Something seemed to have appeared in the air, and streams of flowing black light gathered there. Finally, with a flash of light, a black wolf jumped out of the black magic vortex and landed firmly on the ground. When Brando saw the black wolf, he almost dropped the Haurangaya. Damn, what's going on? He looked at the creature with surprise. It was almost the size of a small pony and stood firmly on the ground with its 4 limbs stretched out. It had pitch-black fur, a pair of blood-red eyes and white fangs. It looked like a black wolf in every aspect. Other than the thick layer of armor covering its head, neck, shoulders, back, thighs and the backs of its 4 paws, the strange gray armor was like a layer of armor covering the black wolf's body. It looked majestic from afar. Brando didn't remember the black wolf being like this. He thought that it was more like a pack of wolves, the male wolf's personal guards, the brutes. Unfortunately, he could clearly see that the luster of the black wolf's armor was clearly a layer of rock, not a cuticle or a bone plate. This ecology is a semi-elemental creature. How could this be? Brando was a little puzzled, but Carglass was even more puzzled than him. Did my lord summon it? He had a look of interest on his face. Is it a black wolf? Amandina and Scarlet didn't say anything. They were already used to Brendel's strange knowledge. First, it had to be related to the Black Tower wizards. Second, it was a secret. Amandina was very clear that she shouldn't ask too many questions. Fortunately, she had such a temperament, otherwise most people wouldn't be able to resist. The red-haired girl was more straightforward. In her opinion, as long as Brendel did something, it was right. As for the reason, Brendel was right. As for the reason, it was just some unimportant things. However, Maria was a little puzzled and asked, Mr. Baron just fused that strange stone into his body, is it okay? Amandina shook her head. Actually, I think it's pretty good. Besides, aren't all wizards like this? Amandina looked at the substitute priestess and replied, My lord knows what he's doing. At this time, Brando didn't have the heart to understand what his subordinates were thinking. He even ignored Carglass's question. He wasn't familiar with Ekka's Heart of Calamity, so he wasn't sure if the black wolf summoned by the Heart of Calamity looked like this. Perhaps it was possible. Brando stood there and thought for a while. He decided to try another skill first. Rock Shadow Beast. He pointed Haurangaya at the black wolf's side. 20 mana points were lost. Mana converged once more, and this time, all of the black mana flowed towards the ground. The ground suddenly arched, and then a strange creature broke out from the ground. Holy shit, this isn't holy shit. Brando waited for the creature to come to a stop. When he saw the creature's appearance, his jaw almost dropped to the ground. It wasn't just him. Even the people around him were stunned. Carglass even shouted in a low voice. Ah, isn't that a rock panther? The youth blurted out. It was indeed a rock panther, but it was different from other rock panthers. Its gray body was streamlined with rocks. Other than its appearance being almost identical to the original rock panther, this strange creature was formed by flowing black mana and floating sharp rocks. The mana formed its torso, and the floating sharp rocks formed the outline of its body, limbs, and head. Brando swore that he had never seen such a creature before. It looked like a demon spawn, a creature formed purely from distorted mana, but it had some characteristics of an elemental creature. What the hell is this? Brando calmed down after being shocked. He immediately thought of his Haurangaya, and immediately raised it to scan it. With this scan, Brando found the problem. Haurangaya's stone lair attribute had disappeared from the sword. If it was any other time, Brando would have cursed out loud if one of the most important attributes on his equipment had suddenly disappeared. But now, he understood that the attribute on Haurangaya did not disappear. Rather, it was better to say that it was merged with Ekka's Heart of Calamity. But does Ekka's Heart of Calamity have this function? This puzzled Brando for a moment. In his original impression, the Heart of Calamity was just a protective amulet with the attribute of the wolf's lair. Perhaps it was special and could only be used after being merged with the body. But Brando thought that it was because the amulet had a special attribute that allowed it to grow. But now he realized that it might not be so simple. Thinking about it, Brando suddenly realized that equipment rarely provided a special system to the player. Just like the few special systems he knew of in the game, the Elementalist's elemental pool system was opened by the profession. The Lord system was opened by the identity and territory of the player. The Elite and Leader system of the monster were brought by the template. After that, there was the Guild and Party system, which need not be explained. There was also the Planeswalker system brought by the Cards of Fate. In other words, Ekka's Heart of Calamity was at least a product of this level. So, the so-called Lair system's ability was to gather all the attributes of the player that had the Lair ability, turning it into an ability of the player and not an external ability. Brando could vaguely guess how this system worked, but he was curious whether this ability could absorb a fixed Lair. If it could, then it would be too overpowered. As long as he searched for Lair all over the world, then defeated the Guardian of the Lair, and absorbed the Lair one by one, wouldn't he eventually become an existence like the Mother Nest? Of course, Brando knew that this was just a thought. If it was really possible, then there should have been a few overpowered players who could summon an army of thousands. But the truth was that there wasn't. Brando thought it through. He even thought of another possibility, which was that the Lair Master system brought by Ekka's Heart of Calamity was something that didn't exist in the game. This was the same as his Planeswalker system. The two were very similar. They were both special systems and they were both brought by a piece of equipment. Brando looked at the Shadow Rock Beast, then at the Black Wolf covered in rock armor. His heart suddenly beat violently. He thought of a possibility. Since the Black Wolf's Shadow Lair's shadow attribute could affect the Rock Leopard, then on the other hand, could the Rock Lair's rock attribute also affect the Black Wolf? At the very least, what he saw before him was enough to prove this point. This meant that the Lair Master system provided by Ekka's Heart of Calamity to absorb the attributes of the Lair was actually to separate the Lair for absorption, and then combine them in the entire system? Brando immediately switched to the information panel of the Lair Master system. The green web of light changed in his eyes, and his pupils suddenly shrank. Lair Master. Acquired 2 attributes. Secondary Shadow, Secondary Rock. Acquired 2 layers, Shadow Lair, Rock Lair. Damn! Brando almost jumped up in excitement. It was true. The Lair Master system separated the attributes of the Lair and absorbed them, then combined them and fused them into different Lair characteristics to form a new creature. The only thing he didn't know was if the new creature only obtained the characteristics, or if it became stronger because of the new characteristics. If it was the latter, then not only would he have profited greatly, he would have profited greatly. Brando immediately gave it a try. He immediately asked Carglass to test the strength of the 2 monsters. Carglass didn't hesitate, or rather, he wanted to test what the 2 monsters were. In his opinion, the 2 monsters were summoned by Brando, and it wasn't the first time they fought against the Rock Leopard summoned by Brando. As long as he treated the Black Wolf as a Rock Leopard, there wouldn't be a problem. When Carglass unsheathed his sword, Brando immediately ordered the Shadow Rock monster to attack. Telepathy was a unique ability of the Lair Master, but it wasn't as good as the ability of a Planeswalker to communicate with his summoned creatures regardless of distance. As a Lair Master, Brando's telepathy range was about 3 to 4 miles. Any further and the effect would be greatly reduced. Upon receiving his order, the Shadow Rock monster immediately attacked. Its attack style was similar to that of the Rock Leopard, but there was a black shadow behind it. Carglass was extremely nervous at first, but when he saw the Shadow Rock monster move, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. In the past month, he had fought against the Rock Leopard countless times, and he was very familiar with its attack style. He thought that even if the Shadow Rock monster was much stronger than the Rock Leopard, it wouldn't be too much of a problem as long as he was careful. Carglass took a step forward, raised his sword, and used Erwin's military swordsmanship to test the Shadow Rock monster. However, it would have been fine if he hadn't probed, but once he did, he couldn't help but be shocked. Carglass thrust his sword forward, but the shadowy rock beast did not even try to dodge the attack. Carglass did not expect the shadowy rock beast to be so violent as to allow the shadowy rock beast to pass through his sword. In the next moment, everyone saw Carglass being pushed to the ground. PS2 update. You know what I mean. From tomorrow onwards, the original update time will be restored. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading.